before some unsettled weather arrives in the northwest.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and the clock is ticking. Every single second counts in the desperate search for those people trapped on a submersible somewhere near the Titanic. I will have a whole host of experts, people really in the know about what could have gone wrong and how, if at all, we're going to be able to rescue these people. This is either going to be one of the greatest rescue stories of all time, or sadly, the Titanic will have claimed yet more lives. Closer to home, though, I think we witnessed an absolute debacle in Parliament yesterday. Cost of living crisis, migrant crisis, mortgage crisis, NHS crisis, you name it, crisis. What did our MPs do? They spent an entire day self-serving, virtue signalling, giving Boris Johnson yet another kicking. I think it's a complete and utter dereliction of duty. I'll be getting stuck right into that. But I also want to talk about this. It is not kind and benevolent to tell children in schools that it's OK to identify as dogs, cats, horses, or in one case even, the moon. Why are we doing this? I think children need saving, and they need saving from our schools. And finally, I'm also going to be getting stuck right into this as well. Meghan Markle is accused not only of being a grifter, but also of faking interviews on her Spotify podcast. Surely not, Meghan, surely not. Loads coming your way in the next hour. GBviews at gbnews.com. Do you think that we should actually be cruel to be kind to children and tell them you cannot be an animal? That is a phrase I never thought I would have to say, but apparently schools are just indulging this kind of absolute nonsense at the moment. GB Views at gbnews.com. Now, though, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Authorities are expanding their search for a submersible tourist vessel that was en route to the Titanic shipwreck in the Atlantic. 5 people are missing. They have approximately 2 days of oxygen left. Rescue teams continue to search for a British billionaire who's on board, as well as a father and son, Shahzada Dawood and Suleiman. Captain Hamish Harding, a pilot who owns an aviation company, wrote on social media saying he would be taking part in yesterday's dive. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel around 1 hour and 45 minutes into the 2-hour descent to the Titanic site. The Prime Minister has said his thoughts are with the families of those involved. The US Coast Guard says a Canadian aircraft has joined the search for the missing vessel. Film director and friend of Hamish Harding, Janet Mickelson, told us she's got full confidence they'll be OK.
Hamish is no stranger to being in a submersible. He has, as you said, dove down to the deepest point on planet Earth and spent the longest amount of time that any human has at the bottom of the planet. So I feel confident that Hamish is calm and collective, and he's an asset to the team in the rescue mission if they have to self-rescue.
Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out on her first return to Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. It's after she was arrested and released without charge in a police investigation into SNP finances. Ms Sturgeon was asked whether she should stand down from the party.
I will always consider what is in the best interests of the SNP. As I've said before, and I repeat, I don't see it as any kind of suggestion it's been a sacrifice. The SNP's been my life, and that's been voluntary and something that I cherish and continue to cherish. But I'm also an individual that is entitled to assert what I believe to my very, very core, that I have done nothing wrong. I respect the process that is underway, but I will continue to maintain that very clearly.
A trial date has been set for January 12th for the man accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill 3 others in a spate of attacks in Nottingham. Valdo Kalakane will enter his pleas in September. He appeared at Nottingham Crown Court today, charged with murdering 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer and 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates in knife attacks on June the 13th. The 31-year-old's also charged with attempting to murder 3 pedestrians by driving Mr Coates' van at them in Milton Street and Upper Parliament Street in the city centre. Well, some breaking news in the last half an hour. US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has agreed to plead guilty on 3 federal tax charges in a deal with the Justice Department. That's according to a court document. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Now, a trial date has been set for Donald Trump in the former US president's documents case. The judgment has set an initial date for August 14th. He faces 37 criminal charges of mishandling files and is accused of keeping US national security material. Trump has pleaded not guilty to the charges that he unlawfully mishandled the sensitive files at a court in Miami a few days ago. Trump's the first current or former president to face criminal charges, all of which he denies. French police are searching the headquarters of the organisers of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. The search was ordered by the French National Financial Prosecutor's Office. Officials say the raids are part of 2 preliminary corruption investigations. Paris 2024 haven't given any further details. The Games begin July 26th. Food inflation has dropped to its lowest this year, but records show it's at the highest it's been in 15 years. According to research by Kantar, grocery prices increased by 16.5% in the 4 weeks to June 11th, compared with the same period a year ago. Nearly 70% of households say they're extremely or very worried about rising food prices. And the Princess of Wales has attended the reopening of the National Portrait Gallery in London. It follows a 3-year refurbishment programme. The gallery has undergone a major transformation since closing its doors in March 2020, the biggest since the building opened 127 years ago. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Yes, it's all action today, but I wanted to have a go at this one first. So, yesterday, we witnessed one of the most grotesque parliamentary spectacles imaginable. Our taxpayer-funded politicians spent an entire day hammering vindictive nails into Boris Johnson's political coffin. They queued up, one after the other, like smarmy rats behind the Pied Piper, to take part in a non-stop, holier-than-thou, virtue-signalling charade. Now, I don't care if you think Boris Johnson was wrong. Loads of people do. Loads of people think he deserved it. What I care about is this. Please can somebody explain to me how yesterday's circus benefited the average man and woman on the street? In the middle of a cost of living crisis, mortgage rates soaring, millions potentially on the brink of homelessness, record unsustainable levels of legal and illegal mass migration, a record NHS backlog, we don't have enough schools, our transport system needs urgent reform. Please explain to me how spending a day going round in circles, taking it in turns to try to seem more moral than the last person, improved any of those things. Our politicians were more energised by sticking the knife into Boris Johnson than they are about solving the numerous crises affecting this country. Theresa May took the absolute biscuit for me. She spent minutes congratulating Harriet Harman, who shouldn't have even been anywhere near chairing this undeniably politically motivated kangaroo court, in my opinion, on account of the fact that she'd already found Boris Johnson guilty of lying before she rocked up on day one. Now, it's worth noting that Theresa May appointed Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, so if she really thought that he was a massive charlatan, why would she effectively make him our envoy to the world? Theresa May was one of the most experienced people to become Prime Minister and one of the very worst at actually doing it. She has a personality like the frozen fish aisle at Morrison's and all the likeability of your nan's curtains. Her constituency is Maidenhead. Her local council has just gone Lib Dem. She's refused to comment to local residents about the town's largest hotel being given to asylum seekers, and from what I can tell, spent her entire life avoiding anything like a single grain of scrutiny that Boris Johnson has had to suffer. She can find the time to turn up to Parliament and slag off Boris, but what's she doing for the people who pay her wages? If her and her quite dorky-looking husband went on a permanent walking holiday in Switzerland, how long would it be before anybody actually reported them missing? Not a single British taxpayer benefited at all from yesterday. I'm sure the young single mum on the breadline who can't get a council house and has been waiting 6 months for a hernia operation was absolutely ecstatic that our politicians spent a day talking about Partygate again. And now we're going to have a secondary inquiry, apparently, into the people who were mean about the first inquiry. Are they taking the mick? Those in Westminster are as bad as the vast majority of the media. They think this is what matters to the British public. The committee was led by somebody who hated Boris, in my view, and thought he was a liar. It has another member who may have broken the rules in a worse way than Boris. They then came to the conclusion, despite not actually providing any evidence for it, and after relentless smear campaigns, that Boris Johnson misled Parliament. They wanted to give him the longest ban since Labour's Keith Vaz offered to do you-know-what with you-know-who. Then they realised that they couldn't ban Boris because he'd quit, so they went through the malicious process of taking his pass off him, and now they want to prosecute anyone who criticises this whole process. And it sets a precedent, and this is important. If an MP now misleads Parliament, knowingly or not, and intention may be inferred rather than proven, then they can be summarily ejected. It's not really OK, is it? We will be trapped in a cycle of non-stop inquiries, with MPs actually refusing to speak in the chamber in case they accidentally get something wrong or they've received bad advice. The irony is that Harriet Harman and Co think that they've done politics and Great Britain a great public service, when in fact the opposite is true. She needs to get out more. This country needs a growing economy, a better NHS, more schools, more houses, strong borders, law and order. Not a load of self-entitled Westminster geeks, snobs and political chancers trying to deflect from their own personal scandals and shortcomings by endlessly hounding a man who has taken more of a kicking than anyone I can think of. Yeah, those are my views. We're going to be talking about all of this. This is it for me. How on earth did yesterday and the subsequent inquiry and then the inquiry into the inquiry into the inquiry going to benefit you at home right now or wherever you are? It's not. You look around your life and do you feel enriched by what you saw yesterday? GBviews at GBnews.com. I will have a debate on this issue a little bit later on in the show. But we are moving on with arguably, really, I suppose, the biggest story In the world right now, a pipe-laying vessel has arrived in the scene where the submersible went missing on an expedition to the wreckage of the Titanic. With less than 50 hours of oxygen remaining for the 5 on board, the US Coast Guard says that it's expanding its search into deeper waters. What is happening right now is terrifying, terrible, but also gripping. We are either going to witness the greatest rescue operation of all time, or very, very sadly, the Titanic will claim more lives. Paul Hawking reports.
Roughly the size of a transit van, Titan went missing with 96 hours of oxygen on board and 5 men. Pakistani businessman and Prince's Trust International advisor Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman. Hamish Harding, a British businessman and explorer. 73-year-old Paul-Henri Nargeolet, known as Mr. Titanic, a French explorer who first visited the wreckage in 1987. And this man, Stockton Rush, the chief executive of OceanGate, the company that owns the submersible.
Out here, this is really focused on one thing, and that's the pressure vessel, and making sure that component, which is clearly the most critical component of the sub, is safe and capable of handling depths down to 4,000 meters repeatedly with people on board.
Although Titan went missing 435 miles off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada, the joint US and Canadian search and rescue operation is being coordinated from Boston. It takes roughly 2 hours to reach the Titanic, which is 2.3 miles down. Communication on Sunday was lost after 1 hour and 45 minutes, suggesting it's somewhere near the bottom. As the world's only 5-man submersible capable of reaching the wreck of the Titanic, there are a few other vessels that can reach those depths, where the pressure is 200 times those of a car tyre.
There's all the other wreckage from the Titanic around there as well, which will send back signals. So it won't be so much a case of looking for it if it's at the bottom, it'll be a case of listening for it. So they've got sonar boys down there, and they'll be hoping that the crew will be able to create some sound, and they'll be able to hear that.
Since launching their 8-day expeditions to the Titanic in 2021, OceanGate have been charging £195,000 for a place on Titan. The sub itself is made from titanium and filament wound carbon fibre, with a loo inside, plus a battery of cameras, lights and scanners, piloted by an actual PlayStation controller. As this picture shows from a previous trip, there are no seats. Hamish Harding, the British businessman and explorer, is one of those on board.
Hamish is no stranger to being in a submersible. He has dove down to the deepest point on planet Earth and spent the longest amount of time that any human has at the bottom of the planet. So I feel confident that Hamish is calm and collective, and he's an asset to the team in the rescue mission if they have to self-rescue.
Most experts agree the sub is likely to be either on the surface waiting to be spotted or on the bottom. If it's the latter, then the sense of urgency is even greater. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
We will be all over this story, of course, as it develops. And I believe that, Paul, there have been a few little developments in the last few minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, so they've widened the search area and they've deepened the search area. They've brought in a pipe-laying vessel, and it's got 2 ROVs, remote-operated vehicles with it, that can go to the bottom to look for this. So this is a huge coordinated operation. You've got the US Coast Guard and military, the Canadian Coast Guard and military, and because this is the only 5-man submarine that can reach those depths, there aren't many pieces of equipment that can get down there to do the job that's needed. And there's only going to be one of two ways. There's only 2 possibilities that most experts agree on. Either it's near the bottom or on the bottom, or it's floating at the top. Now, if it's floating on the top, you would have thought they would have spotted it by now. Although the search area is so huge, it's the size of a transit van, it would still be plausible to miss it, right? If it's on the bottom, there's only 2 other things you can do. You can free it from whatever it's attached to, whatever it's got snagged on, and it's not just the wreck of the Titanic that's on the bottom, there's all the debris that surrounds it. Or you can, if there are motorised arms, you can try to robotically, because remember, you can't send people down in these vehicles. Of course. Robotically, you would try to free it from whatever it's in, and then it comes back to the surface. But obviously you can't, this isn't, they can't exit the submersible because the pressure down there is 400 times what we're experiencing at the moment, 200 times that of a car tyre. It would crush them instantly.
It's just terrifying, isn't it? It's absolutely terrifying. And, I mean, have the families been talking at all? 'Cause, I mean, it must be absolutely terrible for them.
Yeah, so there are 5 people inside this submersible. One of them is Pakistani businessman. He lives in the UK. He's been living in the UK for a long time. Shahzada Darwood, his son, 19-year-old son, Suleiman, is with them. They're the only people that have no submersible experience. So for them, this will be particularly frightening. Given there's around 50 hours of oxygen left, you don't want to be panicking, so they'll be trying to keep their breathing down. Shahzada Darwood works for the Engro Corporation. They've issued a statement saying they're praying for the swift and safe return. He's also an advisor to the Prince's Trust International, who've said they are shocked by the awful news. Hamish Harding, the British businessman and explorer, no other person on Earth has spent longer at the bottom of the ocean. He spent 36 hours at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and you can't go any deeper than that. His aircraft firm, Action Aviation, have said they've put out a statement on behalf of the family saying they're very grateful for all the kind messages of concern and support. They're saying they're extremely proud of Hamish and looking forward to welcoming him home. The other person down there, very interesting, his nickname is Mr. Titanic because he's been down to the wreckage so many times. He's 73 years old. He's a Frenchman called Paul-Henri Nagiolet, and he first visited the wreckage of the Titanic in 1987. And then the CEO of the company, who I would assume is piloting the craft, because it's one pilot plus 4 passengers. That's the man we heard from in that report, Stockton Rush. He's also down there as well.
So as it stands, in terms of what might have gone wrong, obviously we don't know yet, but it could well be tangled in some of the wreckage there. There could have been a power failure. There could be an error with the communication system. I mean, it really is a mystery. But as you said, the clock is ticking, isn't it, at the moment? Because there's around 50 hours left of oxygen.
Of oxygen, yeah, exactly. And I mean, they've deployed sonar buoys as well, which sit on the surface and then emit sonar to the bottom. The problem is when you've got, I mean, effectively, if you've got a flat surface on the bottom of the ocean and there's a vehicle on top of it, when you get a different sonar reading that comes back, there's something there. But when you've got a seabed that's full of debris and the surface is like this, you may not be. It makes it much easier to spot something sitting amongst it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's much harder when you're using sonar equipment. But there's also no signal. Often with sea rescues, there's a signal that's just deployed. The search and rescue teams can follow that signal, but there's no signal here. So they're literally and metaphorically searching in the dark at the moment, and they just need as many pieces of equipment as they can find. Pieces of equipment that can reach that depth.
And it's very few people who would actually necessarily want to do this, very few people who would be able to afford to do this. It's around $250,000 per trip, isn't it, in order to be able to just go down and see the Titanic. And it's not a particularly luxurious craft by any means, is it? It's a smallish craft, really, with not a lot of places to sit. It's only got one window, I think.
Yeah, well, when you say there's nowhere to sit, there's no seats. It's literally the size of a transit van, circular in nature. There's kind of bits bolted onto it, and it's piloted using a video games controller.
This is the thing.
There's been some reporters have spent time on the Titan, and there's video circulating, and you can see the guy, the CEO that's down there at the moment, showing them the video game controller that they're using, and there's kind of, we've got this bit of equipment from Camp World and this bit from here. That's not to say that I mean, this is a remarkable feat of engineering, because when we talk about the bottom of the ocean, you're effectively talking about somewhere that's as close to space as can be in terms of the pressure, the environment, the darkness, the lack of oxygen. And so this is right at the cutting edge of technology. So in building the Titan, they're kind of exploring it as they go along. And I am told that when you go aboard the Titan, you go across, when you board a lot of these submersibles, you are made to sign waivers.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean,
It's not covered by your basic travel insurance.
No, it's certainly not covered by your basic travel insurance, for good reason. So, as it currently stands, there are massive search operations underway on the top of the water, firing down sonar things in order to try to get them to ping something back. There will be a look for them on the top. If they're right at the very bottom, hopefully some of these kind of robot equipments can maybe free them at some point, but that's...
If they can find them.
If they can find them.
Searching in the dark.
it does bring back some really, really, really shocking memories of things like the Kursk disaster from Russia, for example, and other submarine disasters. But we will obviously be keeping you right up to date on this. As I said before, you know, it will either be the greatest rescue operation of all time, quite possibly, or sadly, the Titanic will have claimed more lives. Look, Paul, thank you very much. As ever, Paul Hawkins there. Like I said, we will be keeping you right up to date. Expect some breaking news on that throughout the course of the show, given the scale of the search operation and that time pressure as well. Loads more on that story on our website, gbnews.com, which is, in case you didn't already know, the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis and opinion and the latest breaking news. But yes, I teed off on this at the start of the show. A day after the Partygate debate in the Commons, the big question for me is this: what on earth was the point? Please, somebody explain to me how your average man and woman on the street in any way, shape or form benefited from listening to the likes of Harriet Harman and Theresa May waffle on in some kind of epic virtue signalling contest yesterday. No, we didn't. We've got real crises in this country, and wouldn't it be nice to have politicians who cared as much about them as they do about sticking the knife into Boris? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, in just a few moments' time, I will talk about the crisis in our schools, which sees children identifying as cats, dogs, dinosaurs, horses and even the moon, all with the consent of our teachers. Great stuff. And later in the show, I will cover the shock report that claims that Meghan Markle faked some of the interviews in her podcast series. Who'd have thought? She's already been called a grifter. Anyway, this time yesterday, we were covering the debate in the House of Commons into the Partygate report. It was driving me mad. I don't know about you. But MPs overwhelmingly endorsed a report that found Boris Johnson lied to Parliament. He will now be denied special access to Parliament, usually granted to former MPs, let alone a former Prime Minister. But I am asking today, was this a good use of House of Commons time? Or have they got more important things that they should have been talking about? I am joined now by the lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool. It's Dr. David Jeffrey. Dr. David, thank you very, very much. I thought yesterday was an advert for knocking Parliament down, sacking everyone in it and starting again, because we have a cost of living crisis, mortgage rates looming large, an NHS crisis, a small boats crisis, a crisis everywhere you look. And our MPs were more energised about giving Boris Johnson a kicking than I've seen them about anything.
Yeah, look, I can understand why people would feel like that, but it was an important vote, rather, about whether people who mislead the House of Commons should be allowed to get away with it scot-free. And if Boris Johnson really was as secure as he thought he was in his position, he wouldn't have resigned. So I think you're right. There's a lot of time and a lot of column inches that have been spent on this issue, and now the issue's been put to bed. MPs should be focusing on the more important issues. But
this is the thing, is it? Because we're going to have an inquiry into the inquiry. And this is the problem. We're now going to end up having an inquiry into the people who dared to criticise the inquiry. I am also joined, I believe, a bit of a late show, but we'll go to him as well. I'll come back to you, David, there. Barrister and writer Stephen Barrett, lecturer in British politics. Barrister and writer Stephen Barrett, I should say. Yes, there we go. Look, I was saying before, I thought this was a terrible advert for British politics yesterday. There are so many more important things on. Can you explain to me why the British public should feel enriched and have their lives changed for the better by what they saw yesterday?
Well, no, because I'm warning people that a very dangerous precedent has been set, because they've lowered the test for what it is to mislead Parliament. They've allowed all sorts of treatments of their evidence which will make it easier to convict people in the future. So if they want to now, they can run around accusing each other of this heinous crime that they've just invented, and they can rip absolute shreds out of each other to the point where I don't think ministers are going to be able to answer questions at the dispatch box safely. And, you know, they've been warned time and time again that you don't mess with the rule of law, but they weaponized what it is to lie. They lowered the definition of what it is to lie. They raised the punishments to an astonishing height. And they are, as you now say, running around trying to get everybody who criticised them.
Yeah, Dr. David, it sets a precedent. So if an MP now misleads Parliament, knowingly or not, and intention may be inferred rather than proven, then they can be summarily ejected and quite possibly have their pass taken off them for life. I put it to you that is actually quite a bad thing for democracy.
Well, the thing about the House of Commons is that it's quite a unique institution in that it can set its own rules. So if MPs do think this is too egregious, and if they think it's gone too far, then they can set the threshold of what a committee can take as a standard for ejecting somebody. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Boris Johnson losing his parliamentary pass is not a big hot topic issue for our democracy, right? We know that he basically misled Parliament. We know that he knew things were going on that shouldn't have been going on. And instead of deciding to stand up for his position and fighting the by-election, he decided to resign. All of these things are fairly happened over the last few weeks. And there's a lot of Tories, like myself, right, who like Boris and who voted for him in 2019 and who supported him in the general election, who feel bitterly disappointed with the way that he's carried on. And this is him getting, for once, his just desserts.
I understand that point of view. Stephen, I will put it to you that this has been going on for a very long time. If Boris Johnson was that way inclined, what he could have done was say, I am being hounded to within an inch of my life and my mental health is in the toilet. Please, can you stop it? And everyone would have had to have respected that, because I have never seen anybody be bullied in the press to the extent that Boris Johnson has over the past year and a half. It is absolutely obscene. If anyone, it makes what happened to Philip Schofield look like child's play, what's been going on with Boris Johnson, right? And I just can't help but feel like the young single mum in a council house who's been waiting 6 months for a hernia operation will have been looking at what was happening in Parliament yesterday and thinking, if you had even the tiniest bit of energy to help me out, you would not have spent a whole day congratulating each other, hiding your own personal scandals in the closet somewhere, saying, oh, look, gee, we finally got the nasty Trump light out of Parliament, Stephen.
Well, I mean, the history of show trials is that they start off quite reasonable. Some people will point out that they shouldn't be happening. I like to think like me. And then other people will say, oh, this can only happen once. Don't worry, it's this individual. So you've really got to focus on the next one. And that's why I've constantly been trying to take the focus off the MP in question. And I'm actually just not even going to bother naming the MP in question anymore because it's not relevant to me. But yesterday in the House, I won't name him, but another MP asked the Speaker if members of the public were widespread committing this new crime they've just invented of contempt of Parliament. Are they going to try and take this outside of the House of Commons? I mean, David's quite right. If it stays inside the House of Commons, well, then a plague on all their houses. If they want to be lawless, they can be. That's a matter of our constitution. But are they going to try and take it out of the House of Commons? Are they going to try and target the House of Lords? Are they going to try and target members of the public? How silly are we going to get before people realise that this is a process error and it's not about a specific MP?
Look, both of you, thank you very, very much. It's a bit short and sweet, that, but I think we got all the key points over, and I really appreciate both your times and to have a range of views. It's barrister and writer Stephen Barrett and lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool, Dr David Jeffrey. Yep, my overarching point is quite clearly this. Your emails are flooding in. I'll go to those very, very shortly. gbviews@gbnews.com. Just one quick one. Yesterday was a total disgrace. The world must think we're all nutcases if this is the way that we are carrying on. Old scores being settled, and that's from Leslie. What we saw in Parliament yesterday was the culmination of a massive anti-Boris Johnson campaign, and I can understand that many people think that he deserved everything he got. Yeah, fine, but what did the taxpayer get out of it? What did we gain as a country yesterday? What did the people who were waiting for NHS appointments gain? What did the people who can't get a school place? What are the people who can't get a house? What are the people who are being booted out of their house? What about people who are having to live next door to an asylum seeker hotel? No one. No one got anything, apart from Harriet Harman and maybe Theresa May. gbviews@gbnews.com. A reminder that we'll have more on this story a little bit later on, and I will be joined live by Jacob Rees-Mogg on this very show shortly. I've also got loads of other stories on the way as well. School kids who are now identifying as animals, why they're being allowed to do that. Plus, there's a special report on the rising use of food banks in the UK, more people feeling the squeeze, and one food bank user in Kent has very, very strong words for the Prime Minister.
Pull your finger out your backside and sort the cost of living out.
Well, that's straight to the point. You should have a show here, shouldn't you? Bring you more on that report, but first, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. The authorities are expanding their search for a submersible tourist vessel that was en route to the Titanic shipwreck in the Atlantic, but has not been seen since Sunday. 5 people are missing. They have approximately 2 days of oxygen left. The British billionaire Captain Hamish Harding is on board, as well as father and son Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel around an hour and 45 minutes into their 2-hour descent to the Titanic wreckage site. The Prime Minister has said today his thoughts are with the families of those involved. The US Coast Guard has told us a Canadian aircraft has joined the search for the missing vessel. Here, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out for the first time in Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. And that's after she was arrested and released without charge in a police investigation into SNP finances. Asked whether she should stand down from the SNP, Ms Sturgeon said she'll always consider what's best for the party. US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has agreed to plead guilty to federal tax charges in a deal with the US Justice Department. A court document shows the 53-year-old has pleaded guilty to 2 charges of willfully failing to pay income taxes and a pre-trial diversion agreement on 1 firearm offence. The White House says the president is supporting his son and his efforts to rebuild his life. The Princess of Wales has attended the reopening of the National Portrait Gallery in London. It follows a 3-year refurbishment programme. The gallery's undergone a £41 million transformation since closing its doors in March 2020. That's the biggest since the building opened 127 years ago. Those are your latest news headlines. More on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2725 and €1.1655. The price of gold, £1,517.81 an ounce. The FTSE 100 currently standing at 7,588 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Strap yourselves in for this. A school teacher in East Sussex called a 13-year-old girl despicable because she wouldn't accept that a classmate identified as a cat. Now, you remember that story from yesterday? Yeah. Well, now it's emerged that kids across the UK are claiming to be horses, dinosaurs and even a moon. It's causing problems in class, not least, I don't know how they fit the moon into it, but there you go. I should have to think whether or not the horse... Anyway, let's not do that. Anyway, it makes you worry. It makes you worry about the children who insist on being addressed as if they are animals. I'm joined now by Stella O'Malley, who is a psychotherapist and the director of GenSpect. Thank you very much, Stella. Why are we indulging children who think that they are animals? Shouldn't we, as adults, tell them to snap out of it?
Yeah, I suppose in many ways a lot of activists have shaped policy, and the Department of Education in the UK, in lots of different countries around the world, have been kind of racing to keep up while the activists have shaped the policy. And so an awful lot of teachers, and I have every bit of sympathy for the teachers, they are presuming that the right thing to do is to change every child's pronouns and names as and when they want, without checking to see if there's any sort of evidence base or research that actually supports this theory, and there isn't. And so we've never done it before. We've never had neo-pronouns, so we've never had pronouns like ze, zim, and they, fair, and you know, all the various hundreds of pronouns that are out there. And so now it's got to farcical levels where, of course, some children are just having fun and they're using, you know, I'm a horse and I'm a cat. Other children are very vulnerable and they get into it. And also there's other children who are very vulnerable who might have difficulty with processing, who are caught in the mix of that and told that they're being bigoted if they don't follow the new name or the new pronoun. Yeah. We've got a mess, and it's frankly been shaped by activists. And I feel for the teachers who are operating in a vacuum of information.
Explain that activist element to me. Now, Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, did drill down on this a bit yesterday. She kind of echoed what you're saying. Explain to me how, in your view, a school or the education system being infiltrated by activists leads to a child thinking they're a horse.
Yeah. There are a certain small section of society who are very driven by gender theory, where they think anybody who says they are that gender, not only should they be supported by the whole of society, but also we have to speak of them and think of them as they wish to be thought of and spoken of. And they have become incredibly vocal and incredibly powerful. All the time they kind of brandish the fact that they say that they're powerless. And yet they have managed to kind of operate quite large-scale lobby groups and activist kind of organisations all around the different countries in the English-speaking population. And we have seen how they have infiltrated schools by providing workshops. And an awful lot of the time, teachers are going, I don't know much about gender. We're getting the local expert in. The local experts say they know everything. And the local expert is very often an activist lobby group who have one theory. What?
Yeah, or a nutter.
I think they believe what they're saying. I think where the line needs to be drawn is the Department of Education has to create policies that are sensible and rooted in evidence base and rooted in truth that we can back up and support, rather than theories about this. This is new theories, new experiments, new ideas that have never been tried before. And the schools are making a fool of themselves by allowing themselves to be swayed rather than waiting for a proper...
I think it undermines the parents, though, doesn't it? Because if at home you would quite like Timothy to not be a llama, but then for 6 hours a day at school, the teachers let him behave like a llama, then what do you do as a parent? And then it's not just that with the schools, though, is it? Because then you send them there, he doesn't just come home behaving like a llama, all of a sudden he's draped in a pride flag. He also thinks that this country is built off the back of a depraved, slave-riddled empire, and he hates the colour of his skin. I mean, it just seems like it's absolute madness. Do kids need saving from schools?
I think a lot of schools might have one or two very extreme viewed people who often work in the kind of the humanities, and they might like really be very into the new thinking around gender and critical race theory and stuff like that, and they can shape a lot of policies. I don't think the children necessarily fall in with everything the teacher says. The problem is the more vulnerable kids, because while it's funny, some kid coming home, you know, identifying as a llama, that can be funny. Within this story, there's tragedies happening where very vulnerable kids who often have autism and other kind of challenging needs, and they actually fall in very deeply. They seek medicalization. They might end up with a mastectomy, and they might really, really buy into the idea that they can be a different person. They can be whoever they want to be.
And this is vital.
And everybody else has to fall in with that.
But this is a vital point. Now, I think back sometimes to my school days, and although it wasn't a massively long time ago, the world very much has changed since I was at school. And kids who used to get a kicking, actually, physically, for being a bit different, now I think rightly so, would have more understanding of their needs and more help, really. And that's undeniably a great thing. But then I look at this and I think, at the same time, if we are dealing with some of these children who genuinely do think that they can identify as an owl or something, they obviously have other issues there. And instead of just everyone being told you just need to accept that Oliver is now an owl and the teacher's giving him a round of applause every time he hoots, is anyone actually looking at the psychological reason behind why this child wants to identify as a barn owl?
Well, people are. I'm a psychotherapist, and I certainly know other friends and colleagues. I'm in an organisation called GenSpect, and we're providing sensible guidance to schools, and we're providing sensible guidance to clinicians. But we are a smaller number, and a lot of people contact us privately saying, I don't dare to speak out, because it feels very frightening these days to speak out, and the online world is very vitriolic. So there are people with sense, but generally they feel embattled and frightened. And the people who are very loud and very vocal about it tend to be quite bullying online. And so there's one narrative that's being propagated right now. And you're right, those kids are really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And some of them might be being funny and smart, and, you know, I could imagine being that kid. But there's a whole other group who are lost and lonely and want to be something different and say, yeah, I don't even feel human. I don't feel like myself. I don't know who I am. And they grasp at whatever is going on. And they would be very vulnerable to different things.
Yeah, and unfortunately we haven't got time to really continue this, but I can't help but wonder whether we're seeing now the culmination of things like kids having video games and iPads shoved in their face from like 6 months old, and all of that stuff. I mean, there'd be loads of examples. I'm just not sure that is there not going to be some kind of link between children wanting to live in a fantasy and having a fantasy shoved in front of their noses every time they get on a plane with their parents, every time they go out for dinner with their parents, just to shut them up? But look, we'll have to continue this conversation at the time. Stella, I always really enjoy our chats, and it's great to speak to you, and I'll have to chat to you again very, very soon. It's Stella O'Malley there, who's a psychotherapist and the director of GenSpect. Some much-needed common sense, I think. Look, good news, though. Good news is that grocery price, easy for me to say, inflation has fallen. Bad news is that it is still at a massive 16.5%. So, is this a case of greedy supermarkets profiteering, in which case I think that they need to get a bit of a kicking, OK? Profiteering off people's food misery. Or are they all doing all they can to keep prices down? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, having a look, really, at the supermarket shelves in your shops and trying to save you a little bit of wonga every single time you nip down to Tesco's or wherever. We are Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
At 4 o'clock, I will have the very latest on the desperate search for the deep-sea vessel that's gone missing near the site of the Titanic. And Jacob Rees-Mogg will be live on this show as he gives his take on yesterday's Partygate debate and the treatment of Boris Johnson. And in my view, the absolute disgraceful spectacle that, frankly, did more to turn people off politics than turn it on. We've got so many crises in this country right now. Where do our politicians get off thinking they can just chutter on about Boris Johnson left, right and centre while people are struggling because they are running the country so badly? But on that note, I wanted to shine a light on this because UK inflation was 8.7% in April. Over 4 times the Bank of England's target. I mean, that's another bunch of people who need to get a bit more stick, isn't it? With millions of households struggling, the number of people using a food bank in Gillingham has risen by a factor of 20 over the last 2 years. Well, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, he went to Kent to see just how serious the problem is.
Gillingham Street Angels in Kent, a food bank so busy it can barely cope. Those queuing for free groceries aren't just the homeless and those on benefits. With food prices 20% up on a year ago, even some with full-time jobs are struggling to buy enough to eat.
I'm a nurse, a registered nurse at Medway Hospital.
So you work full-time
Yes.
and you still need to come to the food bank?
Because our salary can't cover our rent, our basic needs.
And there's always been a queue here, always, hundreds and hundreds of people.
And this is why. Every day, Street Angels collects food donated by local supermarkets. This load is from Morrison's, then gives it away. Neil Sharlick, once homeless himself, launched this charity 5 years ago. Street Angels gets some council funding, but survives on volunteer staff and community donations.
I'm glad I'm not in politics because I don't understand it, but something's going wrong somewhere along the line, and it's putting pressure. It's putting pressure on the voluntary sector, charities, because we're the people picking up the pieces and doing what we can.
2 years ago, this food bank had 800 visitors a month. The rising cost of living has pushed numbers up 20-fold to 17,000 monthly, with visitors allowed 4 main items at a time. Street Angels avoids paperwork and income checks. Neil reckons around 1 in 10 visitors don't need to use this food bank, but that's still a 90% success rate.
My own personal policy on this is that for every 10 people that come here, 9 good and 1 is bad. If I waste my time policing the 1 bad and trying to catch the 1 bad, I'm wasting my time. I want to spend my time on the 9 good people that generally need our services.
Anti-poverty campaigners say the use of food banks to counter hunger is rising across the country.
I think that what we're seeing is a level of hunger, of destitution across the country, which is really unacceptable, and I think which the public are more and more concerned about. And we do need to see much greater action from the government on this. I mean, we saw last year, we provided nearly 3 million food parcels. That is a record high. It is higher than, that worst part of the pandemic. It was 37% up on the previous year. And that is part of a longer term trend.
Here in Gillingham, Street Angels users are grateful to Neil Charlick and his team.
You're always able to put something on the table, so that's what really matters at the end of the day. Everyone's suffering the crisis, and, we just need to help each other out and just be humble.
But some feel ministers simply don't understand how many ordinary people live.
Well, let them live a day in the life of someone that's poor or have no money, and then let them suffer like we do daily.
So what's your message to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak?
Pull your finger out your backside and sort the cost of living out.
Liam Halligan, GB News in Gillingham.
And that man's show will be starting on GB News this time next week. Liam joins me now, Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Right, OK, so some people would say that the crisis is not as big as people think, that people can cut down on things like booze and fags and they don't have to go to food banks. Other people say that shops are profiteering and that's part of the reason why. What's the truth?
Lots of questions there. We're going to learn a lot over the next 48 hours. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I'll be in this studio breaking the new inflation number. That is the most important piece of data in Rishi Sunak's premiership so far. If that number is higher than 8, it's 8.7 at the moment in April. If inflation remains above 8 in May, he's got a serious problem convincing the public that he's actually got a handle on the economy. Interest rates are then likely to go up sharply on Thursday when the Bank of England makes its next move. But look, I hear from a lot of people saying, oh, the kids today, they don't know that they don't know they're born. Back in the 80s, we had 15% interest rates. Now they're only 5-6% interest rates. Yes, Patrick, that's true. But youngsters today have bought houses, have bought them at much, much higher prices, much, much higher multiples for a basic house of their average income. That means they're much, much more indebted. And be in no doubt, because interest rates were so low from 2017 through to 2021, and then we had the big inflation. A lot of people locked in a mortgage for 2, 3 or 5 years. Those deals are now expiring and people are coming off mortgage rates of 1 or 2% and they're facing mortgage rates of 6 or 7%.
Yeah.
So their mortgages are going up by 50%, 100% in some cases. And mortgages are often, between a third and a half of your entire income. So this is a serious situation.
Someone's literally just sent me an email, actually. I won't name you, but it's a picture of a basic margarita pizza in Tesco's, which they've said absolute rip-off. It's now somewhere around the £4 mark, which, let's be honest, it's just ridiculous for a bit of cheese with some bread underneath it. And this is happening everywhere. Are shops profiteering? Are people looking at people's miseries and going, I'm going to make a bit of money off the back of this?
Well, I do think tomorrow, when the inflation number comes out, once I've seen the headline number, I'm going to be burrowing away in the ONS database to get the food inflation number. I think that will be the story tomorrow. We had survey evidence out today from a kind of public sector consultancy called Cantor, very respected, saying that they reckon food inflation in May was still up at 16%. Double the basic rate of inflation. Unbelievable. And ONS numbers, the official numbers, are often higher than the Cantor numbers. So I do think food price inflation will stay eye-catchingly high tomorrow, and that will put, again, the retailers very much in the crosshairs of politicians. I do think there's a bit of opportunistic pricing going on by the retailers. I won't say any more than that for now. But at the same time, as the food retailers would say if they were here, buying food, processing food, you've got a lot of labour, you've got energy costs, you've got heating costs for growing stuff, you've got transport costs. All those are still quite high. But it does strike me as... And also food price inflation is high across Europe, right? It's 15% in Germany, so it's not a Brexit thing. But I would say that it's going to become very, very political because it will be seen that food price inflation is the reason why UK inflation is still high and we still keep getting these punishing interest rate rises.
Liam, thank you. I mean, maybe it'll have the chance to become political if they can all stop talking about Boris Johnson in the House of Commons all day. I mean, that'd be quite nice. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, thank you very, very much. Right, OK. Now, there is a desperate race against time. The clock is ticking to reach the deep-sea vessel that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. 5 people are on that submersible, including British billionaire Hamish Harding. I will be giving you up-to-the-second reporting on this. Any breaking news on that? Could it be the greatest rescue mission of all time? And Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me live in a matter of minutes. Stay tuned. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and every second counts in this desperate search for the submersible that has gone missing somewhere near the Titanic with 5 people on board. We are potentially about to witness the greatest rescue attempt in history, or sadly the Titanic will have claimed yet more lives. Any breaking news on this, and there will be some, we will bring that to you very, very quickly. In other news, I'm also going to be talking about this. I thought we saw an absolute disgrace of parliamentary time yesterday. We've got a cost of living crisis, a mortgage crisis, an NHS crisis, a migrant crisis, and our politicians decide that it's the best use of their time and our taxpayers' money to go and give Boris Johnson one final kicking on the way out. But you know what? One man stood up against it all, and that man is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Go from the vindictive to the ridiculous, with not allowing him a parliamentary pass. Well, of all the trivial sanctions you can impose on somebody, that seems to be the most miserable.
Jacob Rees-Mogg is about as pumped up and angry as it's possible for him to get, and he joins me live on this show in a matter of moments. We're also going to be talking, of course, about the latest when it comes to Meghan Markle, Meghan's fake beliefs. She has already been called a grifter, and now she's been accused, anyway, of faking some of her Spotify podcasts. I mean, seriously, what on earth is the world coming to? Absolute disgrace, if indeed it is true. We'll be talking about all of that. And I've got loads more coming your way as well, including this absolutely bonkers story. I mean, this is seriously nuts. A serial stalker who made Premier League footballers' lives absolutely miserable has, in the last few moments, I was just told, been sentenced to a 12-week suspended sentence. She was engaging in ridiculous acts with football stars, hounding them non-stop. I'm going to be looking at this particular case, but also asking the question, once you become superstar famous, how common is it to get stalkers? How dangerous can it be? And frankly, how weird can it get? All of this coming your way and much more with me, Patrick Christys. Get those views coming in thick and fast. GBviews at GBnews.com. As you can tell, loads to go at. Make sure that you keep your eyes and ears peeled for Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is ready to go very shortly. But now it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, as you've been hearing, rescue teams are expanding their search now for a submersible tourist vessel that was en route to the shipwreck of the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean. 5 people are inside the submersible, which is believed to have approximately 2 days of oxygen left. British billionaire and explorer Captain Hamish Harding is on board, as well as Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel around 1 hour and 45 minutes into the 2-hour descent to the Titanic site off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada early Sunday morning. The Coast Guard saying a Canadian aircraft has now joined the search. Here, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said he hopes passengers will be found soon.
I want to put on record the UK government's thoughts to those individuals who are currently in the submersible in the North Atlantic. We wish them all the luck, and of course we hope that they will be swiftly found and returned to their loved ones.
James Cleverly speaking there. Well, Nicola Sturgeon has been speaking out on her first return to the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. And that's after she was arrested and released without charge following a police investigation into SNP finances. Ms Sturgeon was asked whether she should stand down from the party.
I will always consider what is in the best interests of the SNP. As I've said before, and I repeat, I don't see it as any kind of suggestion it's been a sacrifice. The SNP's been my life, and that's been voluntary and something that I cherish and continue to cherish. But I'm also an individual that is entitled to assert what I believe to my very, very core that I have done nothing wrong. I respect the process that is underway, but I will continue to maintain that very clearly.
A trial date has been set for January the 12th. The man accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill 3 others in a spate of attacks in Nottingham last week. Valdo Calocane will enter his pleas in September. He appeared at Nottingham Crown Court today, charged with murdering 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates in knife attacks on June the 13th. The 31-year-old is also charged with attempting to murder 3 pedestrians by driving Mr Coates' van at them in the city centre. In the United States, President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has pleaded guilty to federal tax charges. A court document shows the 53-year-old entered the plea on 2 charges of willfully failing to pay income tax and a pre-trial diversion agreement on 1 firearm offence. The White House says the president is supporting his son and his efforts to rebuild his life. And a trial date has been set for Donald Trump in the former US president's documents case. The judge has set an initial date for August the 14th. He faces 37 criminal charges of mishandling files and is accused of keeping US national security data. Trump has pleaded not guilty to the charges that he unlawfully mishandled sensitive files at a courthouse in Miami. Trump is the first current or former president to face criminal charges, all of which he denies. French police are searching the headquarters of the organisers of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. The search was ordered by the French National Financial Prosecutor's Office, saying the raids are part of 2 preliminary corruption investigations. Paris 2024 hasn't given any further details. The Games still due to begin on July 26th. Here, food inflation has dropped to its lowest level this year, but records show it's at its highest that it's been in 15 years. According to research by Kantar, that's Grocery Price Index, increased by 16.5% in the 4 weeks to June the 11th. That's compared with the same period a year ago. Nearly 70% of households say they're extremely or very worried about rising food prices. And the Princess of Wales has attended the reopening of the National Portrait Gallery in London. It follows a 3-year refurbishment programme at a cost of over £40 million, the biggest since the building opened 127 years ago. The Princess met with Sir Paul McCartney and the artist Tracy Emin while she did so. You were GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Loads on today, all of the big stories, but I just wanted to start by teeing off on this. The kids aren't all right. They want to identify as cats, dogs, dinosaurs and, remarkably, the moon. Never before has that immortal anthem, "Hey Teacher, Leave Those Kids Alone," been so appropriate. I am becoming increasingly convinced that our children need saving. They need saving from some weird kind of woke ideology that has infiltrated schools and the minds of, at times, clearly, very thick teachers. It is not the kind, benevolent thing to do to indulge a child who wants to behave like a farmyard animal. In fact, it's very cruel. How does that prepare them for the real world? It's also extremely dangerous to force other children to play along with it. We do not live in a cartoon fantasy world, and if you send your kid to school, you want them to learn English, maths, science, a bit of a foreign language, maybe a smattering of art. I don't want them to learn that they were born into the wrong body, their real body is actually that of a horse. I don't want them to learn that because they're white, they're carrying some kind of privilege with them, or that Britain was built off the back of an evil slave empire. Now, if teachers are going to let children identify as animals, then they should make them go the whole hog, if you'll excuse the pun. If they're cats, they should have to use a litter tray at the back of a classroom and eat out of a dish. If they're a horse, they should be forced to sleep in a stable and eat hay. Perhaps they should be entered into the occasional race so a little man with a whip can make them jump over a fence. I don't really know how this theory would work in terms of the child who wants to get this, and this is genuinely happening in a school right now, identify as the moon. Perhaps they just have to stay hidden for half the day and then only come out at night. Occasionally NASA fires something in their general direction. But there is a solution, I think. There is. That teachers feel empowered to tell children they're not actually animals. I know, it's radical, isn't it? Although, given a recent case of a primary school teacher not accepting a kid's gender and then being sacked and potentially losing their house, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Another alternative is homeschooling. I think homeschooling used to be seen as maybe a bit weird or unfair to the child, but I honestly think these days it might be more unfair to send a youngster to a building run by woke idiots so they can be confused about their genitalia, made to feel awful about the colour of their skin and indoctrinated with rubbish. The thing is, it's also undermining parents. What happens if somebody doesn't want their child to be a llama, but they're allowed to behave like a llama for 6 hours a day at school? I don't know about you, but what I would rather have teachers who taught children to identify as doctors, accountants, lawyers, barristers, pilots or rocket scientists. Right, loads more on that. GB Views at GBNews.com coming your way. I will also have Jacob Rees-Mogg on a little bit later on to absolutely pile in on the proverbial show that we saw in the House of Commons later. But big news in this hunt, this every second counts hunt, really, for this submersible that's gone missing somewhere near the Titanic. A pipe-laying vessel has arrived at the scene of where this submersible went missing on an expedition to the wreckage of the Titanic. There is now less than 50 hours of oxygen, supposedly, on board for the remaining 5 people. The US Coast Guard says that it's expanding their search into deeper waters, and the sub, which is named Titan, lost communication with tour operators around 435 miles south of St John's in Newfoundland on Sunday morning. Among the 5 on board are British billionaire Hamish Harding, UK-based Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. Neither of them, as far as we're aware, had been on a submersible before. I am joined for the very latest on this by our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, I mean, every relative's worst nightmare. What's the latest?
So the latest is that the search area has been widened and deepened. So more Canadian aircraft have been brought in. One of them's carrying sonar from the air. Then you've got the a pipe-laying vessel. And I've actually just been reading about it since I last spoke to you, Patrick. It's called the Deep Energy. It's got 2 remotely operated vehicles. Now, they can only dive to 3,000 metres. That's about 1.8 miles. The wreckage of the Titanic is at 2.3 miles, and the Titan can reach depths of, it says, according to the company's website, 2.4 miles, with what it calls a comfortable margin of error. So these 2 remote robot submersibles that would be dropped out by the Deep Energy would travel down and hopefully help to see further into the murk and into the bed, but they wouldn't be able to reach the bed if indeed the Titan is there. Right. So the search area has been widened. They're also now looking deeper as well once they get these underway. I'm also hearing, by the way, that the French are sending a ship as well with sonar technology as well. So this is turning into an international search and rescue. But as you mentioned, time is of the essence. Yeah. It was last seen around about 9 a.m. UK time on Sunday, so they have until round about 9 a.m. on Thursday, if my maths are right. It's about 96 hours of oxygen at the most, unless, of course, and this will be if they are alive and they're inside that submarine, inside that submersible, wherever they are, they'll be trying to stretch out that oxygen and, of course, restrict the amount of CO2 that they're breathing. So small, shallow breaths, try not to panic, and try and stretch that 96 hours out a little bit further.
I mean, it's also worth noting that this is by no means a luxury vehicle. It is essentially a transit van with even less inside of it.
Yeah, it's about the size of a transit van. It's circular. There are no seats inside. There are heated walls, and it's piloted by literally by a video games controller. There is a toilet, and then that's about it. And there's 5 people in there. You've mentioned some of the names before. You've got Hamish Harding. He's a British businessman and explorer. Spent 36 hours at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, very experienced in those conditions. Another man, Mr. Titanic, he's only 73 years old, a Frenchman, Paul-Henri Nargillet. And then we've got Stockton Rush, he's the CEO of OceanGate, who owned the company. The 2 people on board that I believe this environment, certainly without this emergency situation, it'll be completely alien to them, are Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. He's a Pakistani businessman, been living in the UK a long time, works for a company called Engro Corp and is an advisor to the charity, the Prince's Trust International. For them, this will be particularly frightening, but you'd like to think that the other 3 will be coaching them through it as they wait for the search and rescue teams to first find them and then try to retrieve them, because there are only 2 ways, if they are at the bottom, to be freed from the wreckage or to be pulled up.
Yeah, I mean, good grief. Well, look, thank you, Paul. You'll be keeping us up to date, of course, as and when there are any developments. And with this kind of scale of a rescue operation, one would hope we would get some development over the course of this show or into the evening. Paul Hawkins there. I am joined now by Ryan Ramsey, who was in the Navy submarine service for 23 years. Ryan, thank you very much. Look, your knowledge on this is just going to be really, really useful to me and to everyone who's watching and listening to this show. What's your take on what's happening then? What's the chance of a successful rescue, do you think?
So I think there's some real challenges with achieving a rescue at this stage, and the first one is, as you've already rightly pointed out, it's exceptionally deep. So I can't think of a rescue that's been conducted in recent times to those particular depths. The second one is, you've talked about air and you've talked about carbon dioxide, but also temperature. So it's exceptionally cold down there, and if they haven't got electricity or they haven't got the ability to be able to generate heat, then they're going to be getting cold very, very quickly. So speed is of the essence if they're going to execute some form of rescue. But then there's the next challenge on from that. They don't even know where it is. So it's got to be somewhere close to the Titanic. But if they're widening the search patterns, then it's clear that however they've searched so far, they haven't found anything.
No, indeed. And when it comes to the amount of oxygen that we believe is available, it's somewhere in the region of 50 hours. That very much is a best-case scenario, I think, isn't it? And certainly, by the sounds of it, from what you're saying, if they are at the bottom and there are maybe other things wrong with this submersible, it's not looking good.
I mean, my thoughts with the families, and everybody's looking for hope with this, but there also needs to be a dose of realism that goes with this. And you're right, it doesn't, every hour that passes without having found it or without initiating a rescue means you're closer to failure, effectively. And I think the location piece is one part of it, but to be able to generate a rescue outside of 600 metres of depth is really, really difficult.
You have been underwater quite a lot, really, in your capacity as the Navy's submarine service for 23 years. I imagine you got really used to that. But for people like two of the people on this who, as we understand, had not ever been on a craft like this before, I mean, to not panic must be impossible.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, everybody fears what they don't understand, and that is a crazy experience. I mean, even if I was on board a submersible at that particular depth, I would be anxious, very, very anxious. And we always say that the submarine services around the world are fully trained, they're fully trained crews who understand how submarines operate, they understand the environment that they operate in, and they're trained to deal with any eventual crisis, whereas with the exception of the pilot on board, the pilot will be trained, but everybody else is not able to do anything. And it's such a small, confined environment. Some of the worst part of it is not being able to do anything. You've got no control over your destiny at that point. There's nothing else you can do except wait and hope that somebody is going to come and rescue you.
Should things like this exist? I mean, you were obviously in the Navy, and that is military-grade equipment run by a series of people who have to undergo X amount of years training, and you're constantly surrounded by these people. And also, as well, part of your remit is to potentially save the world, or at least a part of it at any moment's notice. So the existence of the kind of thing you were doing is necessary. Should people, do you think, be able to pay £250,000 quid to get in something that's the size of a transit van and try and have a closer look at the Titanic? Or was it a recipe for disaster, is what we're trying to get at?
Yes, I mean, I've been pondering about this today, and the fact is, people pay money to do extreme. If they've got the money to be able to do it, they pay money to do extreme things and push the boundaries of what humans can do. So, if you look at space travel, you could ask the same question. Bezos and Richard Branson enabling civilian flight into space is another example. But the sea's less explored than space, and I understand why adventurers would want to push the limits to go and do that. And in some case, this is always going to result in tragedy as you push those boundaries. And sadly, here we are.
Just based off what we all know at the moment, if you're comfortable doing it, I suppose, I don't want to drag you down an alleyway you're not comfortable with, but there's numerous things that may have gone wrong. Clearly, something has. So it's either maybe tangled in the wreckage or lost power or something. I mean, do you have any theories?
Yeah, I do. So the fact that they were in communications for an hour and a half before communications were lost effectively would indicate to me that something catastrophic had happened at that point. So I would take that either they've had an electrical failure or they've had a mechanical failure on the submersible itself, which has resulted in basically losing control of it, which is why they've lost communications and no longer been able to do anything. If they've lost control of the submersible itself, then they have no control over where the submersible lands, so it just continues its descent. And then, of course, once it's at the bottom, trying to recover that without power, without electricity, you can't do anything manually because it's a sealed tube. Effectively, you can't open the hatch and hope to escape because you're so deep. The pressure is 400 bar at 3,000 meters. So it's considerable challenges to deal with. And then affecting a rescue on a submersible, whilst we've got, for example, the NATO submarine rescue system, which is geared up to rescue off any submarine in the world, as are most rescue systems, they're not geared up to rescue from submersibles. So I think there's been some technical issues. They haven't been able to deal with those either immediately or subsequently, and then it's trying to work out how you recover that situation.
And just in terms of that recovery, one final one while I've got you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let's say it's on the bottom of the ocean, which, I mean, there's pretty much a 50-50 chance about that's where it's going to be. So let's say it's on the bottom of the ocean. How are we getting that back anytime soon?
So, yeah, well, that's the $50 million question, isn't it? How do you recover something? Firstly, you need to locate it. I mean, if you think how long it took to find the Titanic, it took ages. To try and find something that's 6.7 meters long somewhere in the vicinity of wreckage around the Titanic is monstrously difficult. And then to recover it, you can't use another submersible to be able to do it. You can't use a remotely operated vehicle that you were talking about previously to do it. There needs to be some way of attaching something, a cable or otherwise, in order to bring it to the surface. And that's in excess of 2.4 kilometre cable to be able to do that. And that's never been done before.
Look, Ryan, thank you. Really, really interesting to get your insight on this, and thank you for coming on and sharing that with us all. It's Ryan Ramsey there, who was in the Navy's submarine service for 23 years, saying a lot of what I think, tragically, we all maybe thought, which is it is a depressingly bleak scenario, isn't it, for those people who are in that submersible vehicle at the moment, somewhere near the Titanic. Of course, their thoughts are all with their families, with them. And if there are any developments, we will bring those to you straight away here on this very show. Well, you get loads more on that story on our website, and that's GBNews.com. It's the fastest-growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis, big opinion, and, of course, all of the latest breaking news, like that story that we just brought to you right there. Now, a few days after Harry and Meghan's multi-million-pound Spotify deal was binned, it's being claimed that Meghan faked some of the interviews. And in just a few minutes, this will be big. Jacob Rees-Mogg will be right here on this show to give his take on yesterday's Partygate debate in the Commons. I think it was a waste of time. I suspect he does as well. Jacob is about as pumped up as he gets on this, so we'll have full throttle Jacob Rees-Mogg coming your way shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg is ready to go. I'll have him on the show in just a matter of moments with his views on yesterday's debate about the Partygate report, Harriet Harman, Theresa May, politics in general. But the hits just keep on coming for Harry and Meghan, because Meghan's been accused of faking some of the interviews that she did in her podcast for Spotify. Surely not. The couple's deal was worth around 18 million quid. I would do anything for 18 million quid, but that says more about me, I think. But it was terminated after just one series, and now the American website Pod News says it's heard from multiple sources that some of Meghan's interviews were done by other people with her questions edited in afterwards. On top of that, a senior Spotify executive has called Harry and Meghan grifters. There was another word that he used before grifters, but it is just about to go 4:30 and we can't use it. Joining me now is royal commentator Caroline Aston. Caroline, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. I mean, this is shocking if true, isn't it? Meghan Markle, for 18 million quid, couldn't even be bothered to interview people herself. Surely not.
Well, quite. And here we have another subplot in the saga that is Sussex life. Yes, and it's a nasty feeling, isn't it, that only some of the glitterati that were featured in the podcast were actually glittering enough to be interviewed by the Duchess herself. There's a kind of hint of diva-ish stuff there, that you had to be at a certain level to be in her presence. Otherwise, an intermediary would do the job for her. And then she, as you say, was edited in. You wouldn't believe it. And the grifters, well, that's a story that's going to run and run in America, I think. Not good, as Meghan, of course, attempts to relaunch her brand, her image as the face of Dior, having, of course, conveniently sent her husband, Prince Harry, along to the coronation for a brief visit, where he was dressed in, guess what? Dior. What else?
Oh, my gosh. I mean, it all comes together, doesn't it, this, really? But why would any brand want to work with her if you just hand over 18 million quid and then she gets some poor runner or whatever to interview someone who's still very famous, but, of course, is not on her level? This is just an absolute mick take, isn't it?
Well, hugely divisive. There's more than a whiff of Marmite about the Sussex brand. You either love it or you don't think much to it at all, or sometimes you even wish it would go away altogether. And I think Dior are going out on kind of a commercial limb here, because there's been lots of stuff out there online, people saying, well, that's it. I'll never buy a Dior bag or Dior perfume or indeed anything Dior, because I don't want to put more money into the coffers that run Camp Montecito. It's as simple as that. Dior may come to regret this, and I think Meghan herself is going to be very much under the microscope in the days and weeks ahead. Will Netflix drop them as well?
Well, why not? I mean, there appears, although I'd be gutted if Netflix dropped them, I don't like to go on about this, Caroline. In fact, thanks for bringing it up, but I was actually in that Netflix documentary a couple of times. But I get embarrassed talking about it, so we'll move on. But every single time that Meghan especially pipes up with something, there appears to be a story in the immediate aftermath that either proves or strongly indicates that it's not true. You know, you can literally rattle off countless examples here, whether it's with the car, whether it's with the racism, whether it's whatever. She doesn't like to be called a diva, and she accuses people of racism, really, whenever they dare to criticise her. But in all of this now, it would appear that she hasn't worked very hard for her 18 million quid and has actually fundamentally lied to the audience, if this is true, who think that they are getting Meghan Markle interviewing someone, when in fact they had a producer and Meghan Markle dubbed in afterwards.
Absolutely. But how very short-sighted and how very trusting to think that this wouldn't eventually leak out, as it has done. And I think all the way through this 3-year period since the Great Escape to Montecito, to the sunlit climes of California, there have been some really big hiccups in the PR that these two have used. They've fired people, they've hired people, and just somehow they managed to fall short all the while. I mean, looking at Harry's visit over here the other week to the Mirror Group newspaper trial, again, his whole attitude, demeanour, there's just this hint all the time of being entitled, of being privileged, and sadly, Patrick, out of touch with what's really going on outside the bubble that is their world. Don't forget, they still owe some books as well, the Penguin Random House book deal. And Harry did tell us that there were 400 pages of spare that ended up on the cutting room floor. So brace yourself for that. Come to think of it, though, Patrick, where is Harry? He's gone very, very quiet.
Yeah, they appear to be doing less and less together, and I wonder what happens there. Caroline, can I thank you from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to do an actual, real, face-to-face interview with me in person? It's a novelty. I don't know, Meghan obviously isn't aware that this kind of format exists, but there we go. Caroline, thank you, as ever. Caroline Aston, who's a royal commentator, fascinating font of royal knowledge as well. Good stuff. Now, loads more to come between now and 5 o'clock. I will have the story, really bizarre this, of a woman who branded herself Devil Baby, who's been sentenced for stalking and harassing Premier League footballers to the absolute extreme, by the way. And in just a few minutes, yes, he is ready to go, a live interview with the one and only Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's going to have his say on the Partygate debate, on Harriet Harman, on Theresa May, on all of the absolute guff and nonsense that we heard in Parliament yesterday. But first, it's your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Rescue teams are expanding their search for a submersible tourist vessel that was en route to the shipwreck of the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean. 5 people are inside the submersible, which is believed to have approximately 2 days' oxygen left. The family of the British billionaire Hamish Harding, who's on board, have released a statement saying they have great faith and trust in the rescue teams. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel around an hour and 45 minutes into the 2-hour descent to the site of the Titanic off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada on Sunday morning. A Canadian aircraft has now joined the search. Here, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out for the first time in Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. That's after she was arrested and released without charge in a police investigation into SNP finance. Asked whether she should stand down from the SNP, Ms Sturgeon said she'll always consider what is best for the party. And in the United States, President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has pleaded guilty to federal tax charges. A court document shows the 53-year-old entered a plea on 2 charges of willfully failing to pay income taxes and a pre-trial diversion agreement on 1 firearm offence. The White House says the president is supporting his son and his efforts to rebuild his life. And King Charles has arrived at Royal Ascot, the first time attending as monarch alongside Queen Camilla. Arriving by traditional horse and carriage, the couple, joined by the Duke and Duchess of Wellington, waved to the crowds in the grandstand. His Majesty has taken over the late Queen Elizabeth's thoroughbreds, with several due to race over the next 5 days. Those are your headlines. More on our website, gbnews.com.
Some breaking news that has literally just come into our laps right now, and this is regarding the search for the submersible that's gone missing near the site of the Titanic wreck. The US Coast Guard will hold a news conference at 6 p.m. our time, and we will bring you that live on GB News. So the US Coast Guard will hold a news conference at 6 p.m. in relation to that submersible that has gone missing near the wreckage of the Titanic. We will bring that to you live here on GB News. Closer to home, this time yesterday, we were covering the debate in the House of Commons into the Partygate report. Now, MPs overwhelmingly endorsed a report that found Boris Johnson lied to Parliament. He will now be denied special access to Parliament, usually granted to former MPs and Prime Ministers as well. But was this really a good use of Commons' time? Haven't they got more important things to be talking about? Conservative MP for North East Somerset, GB News presenter, fan favourite Jacob Rees-Mogg certainly thinks so.
So when it says that we conclude that Mr. Johnson is unlikely to have been unaware, a sort of obscure use of a double negative to try and impute malfeasance to somebody where they cannot prove it.
Absolutely.
They want to assume something, they want to impute something because they want to come to a particular conclusion.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I'm delighted to say, joins me now. Jacob, thank you very much. I watched all 14 minutes, and I would urge everybody to do the same, of you on your feet in Parliament yesterday, tearing absolute strips off the committee, tearing absolute strips off the report itself. Why didn't more people turn up and vote against it?
Well, because the vote was a foregone conclusion that the opposition was all going to vote against Boris because it was fundamentally political. Gets wrapped up as if it's judicial and if it's a fair inquiry. It's not, it's politics. And once you have the opposition against Boris and the Boris haters within the Conservative Party, of whom there are sadly too many, then Boris was always bound to lose almost whatever the report had said. And 118 Conservatives voted against Boris yesterday, but bear in mind 148 Conservatives voted against him in the vote of no confidence a year ago. So in some ways his numbers are better now than they were last year.
Well, I'm not surprised, and the latest polling shows that he is more popular than Rishi Sunak, and I can't help but wonder whether or not the Conservative Party have just committed Harry Carey.
Well, if we did it last year, and now we are where we are. But yes, when Boris Johnson left the Prime Ministership, the Tories were a few points behind in the opinion polls, and now we're about 20 points behind in the opinion polls. So you see the cause and effect, that Boris is a popular national figure who connects with voters, and getting rid of him was a mistake. But all Conservatives watching this today must rally round Rishi Sunak, because we don't want a Keir Starmer government.
Well, talk to me a bit about Harriet Harman. Now, Harriet Harman appeared to be absolutely loving it yesterday, and from what I can gather, Jacob, there is now going to be an inquiry into the inquiry. We have a cost of living crisis, mortgage rates, massive concern, migrant crisis, both legal and illegal, NHS waiting times at record levels, not enough school places. I could go on. And yet The people locked in that Westminster bubble seem to think that the British public want more Partygate, want more inquiries. They need to get out more or ship off, don't they?
Well, the inquiry into the inquiry is entirely self-indulgent. It's an inquiry into how the poor dears were offended because people criticised their committee. As a matter of freedom of speech, you must be entitled to criticise parliamentary committees, and dare I say, you must be free to criticise MPs. And there may even be some people who want to criticise me, and you may think that's deeply shocking, but it's their democratic, free speech right. And you're allowed to criticise Harriet Harman too, and say she shouldn't have chaired that committee, and will she please name the member of the government who said it was all right for her to be the chairman of that committee, because I can tell you the Prime Minister at the time didn't know this was the case.
Yes, expand on this, because you were actually Chris Bryant, who's, you know, always good value in a way, did decide to try to take you at task yesterday and say, well, did you raise at the time that Harriet Harman, a woman who had openly expressed that she thought Boris Johnson was a liar before she was asked to sit on a panel and decide whether or not Boris Johnson was a liar, whether or not she should have been removed from this panel? And you said, yes, you had called for that. So just explain, as you understand it, yeah, how on earth that happened. Go on.
Well, I said it in a number of interviews. I was more than happy to say it publicly to people who asked me that I thought she should have done the same as Chris Bryant, who behaved very properly in this circumstance. But Harriet Harman herself said that the government had said it was all right for her to carry on. But she didn't specify who in the government said this. And I think in the interests of transparency, she needs to confess and say who it was and whether this person was actually speaking for the government or not.
Now, Jacob, you hit some really key points, which I'm going to ask you to explain again for me, really, here, which is that a fixed penalty notice, which has caused such a hoo-ha for Boris, is not an admission of guilt. You also appeared to say that that report, in relation to Harriet Harman, for example, was quite quiet about the issue of bias as well. And you hit a couple of other really key points in your 14 minutes. Well, would you mind doing a job of kind of tying this up in a neat little bow for us, really, for people who haven't actually had the pleasure of seeing you on the floor of the Commons?
Well, very, very simply, the committee always took the blackest view of anything Boris had said or done. It assumed a fixed penalty notice was a confession of guilt, which the Lord Chief Justice specifically said it wasn't in a court judgment. It also presumed to know what Boris was thinking at one particular time, and it was unaware of what ministers were being told in relation to what we were supposed to say about the parties, what the official line was from officials. All of that they ignored because they were determined to find him guilty. And in Annex 1, where they say we're going to answer all Boris's points in his letter, they ignore the point about the partiality of the chairman of the committee. So while saying that Boris was disingenuous and he didn't tell the truth, they're not necessarily as straightforward and as transparent as they claim they would like to have been.
And going forward, what this could potentially mean is a precedent where an MP now could mislead Parliament knowingly or not. The intention may be inferred rather than proven, and they can be ejected and presumably never allowed to roam freely through the corridors of Westminster again. I suspect that that will lead to less accountability in Parliament, and frankly, it's bad for democracy because people will be too afraid to stand up and actually say anything in the House of Commons. Instead, later on, they are judged by someone who already thinks they are a liar to have misled the House.
I think that's right. I think more ministers will say, I will write to answer that question. I think that the previous practice, where if you were advised by officials, it was accepted that that was an honest mistake, and the committee decided to apply its own interpretation to what they thought Boris meant by things that he said, which seems to me to be really stretching the point in terms of whether something is accurate or inaccurate. Surely it's what the person meant when he said it, not your interpretation of it. The good news is, if there is any, is that Parliament cannot bind its successors. So if the voters send Boris Johnson back to Parliament, then this report is a dead letter.
Go on, explain that to me then. So if Boris Johnson stands for election again at some point in the future, what does that mean?
That means this report is completely irrelevant. They've taken away his pass as a visitor, but if he were returned to Parliament as an MP, this report becomes completely irrelevant. Dead letter, no significance. Fortunately, our fundamental constitutional right to send to Parliament whoever we like is unaffected by this self-serving report.
You know him better than most. Will he?
I hope so. To be perfectly honest, I don't think he's decided. But I think he remains a great national figure with huge popularity amongst Conservative voters.
You also made another key point yesterday, Jacob, which stood out for me, which was about the idea that Boris Johnson was parroting the advice that he was given by aides and communication staff whilst he was in the House of Commons. And that was government and ministerial-wide advice. So the idea that Boris was standing there on his own, essentially lying to Parliament, is in itself not really true. But the committee didn't look at that, is that right? They didn't look at whether or not Boris Johnson, a Prime Minister who, like I imagine most ministers, relies on communication advisers and advisers in general at times, was merely parroting what they were telling him to say.
And this is really important because before Prime Minister's questions, and for me as Leader of the House before business questions, you would have a file of papers an inch thick. And you were able to rely on those as being what the official position of the government was on every issue you cared to mention. Covered almost everything, anything anyone was likely to ask you about. You couldn't, of course, know that personally from your own investigation and your own detailed knowledge. And I, as Leader of the House, was given the very clear line to take from officials that the rules were followed at all times. That was the government-wide position. That would have been checked by officials. Officials are very conscious of the rules of misleading the House of Commons, and it's therefore something ministers could reasonably rely on. Did the Privileges Committee ask other ministers what briefing they'd been given? No, of course not, because they wanted to come to a particular judgment.
Now, just lastly, Jacob, Theresa May is the MP for Maidenhead. Maidenhead's local council has just gone Liberal Democrat, and there has been a really conspicuous vacuum of silence from Theresa May in the face of a lot of local residents being up in arms over their largest local hotel being commandeered for use as an asylum seeker hotel. There are planning issues there as well. My point is this: within Theresa May's own constituency, she doesn't appear to be doing very much. But she found the time yesterday to come to Parliament to applaud Harriet Harman and to stick the stiletto into Boris Johnson. A word for her?
Well, actually, I think you're being a bit unfair on her. I think she is a very assiduous constituency MP, but I think she took the view that revenge is a dish best served cold.
OK, fair enough, Jacob. Look, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on. And, of course, you will, I believe, anyway, be gracing our televisions later on. Jacob Rees-Mogg, everybody.
I'm back, yes. Yes, I'm sorry I wasn't with everybody yesterday, but I'm back at 8 to 9 o'clock this evening.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's going to be a must-watch. Jacob Rees-Mogg, so there we go, a fellow GBNews presenter and, of course, a Conservative MP. Fascinating, that, though. Just think about all the little details in there, down to that very notion of Boris Johnson being handed advice as anybody in any walk of life, actually. You know, think about the CEO of a business, for example, going into a big briefing in a big meeting, being handed a dossier by a communications advisor or some kind of advisor as well, being given the corporate line to saying it, and then having the parliamentary pass taken off them, hounded, etc. And I will just finally finish on saying this, which is that if Boris Johnson wanted to, he could very easily make a case for an epic national-scale bullying number being done on him and the emotional and physical turmoil that this will take on him. So there we go. Anyway, a reminder of the breaking news that I brought to you a few moments ago regarding the search for the submersible that's gone missing near the site of the Titanic wreck, and the US Coast Guard will hold a news conference at 6 p.m. We will bring you that live here on GB News. Now, a woman who branded herself Devil Baby has been sentenced for stalking and harassing Premier League footballers. It is an incredibly bizarre case, this. I will fill you in on all of the details very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
The Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a few moments, I will have the latest on the race against time to find that deep-sea vessel carrying a British billionaire that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. A reminder for you that the US Coast Guard will hold a news conference at 6 p.m, which we will bring you live right here on GB News. But this is an interesting story for you. A model who dubbed herself Devil Baby has been handed a 12-week suspended prison sentence after admitting stalking not 1, not 2, but 3 Premier League footballers. Ola Sloan bombarded Chelsea's Mason Mount and Brighton defender midfielder Billy Gilmour and harassed Chelsea defender Ben Chilwell with calls, texts and social media posts after she briefly dated Mount. She set up at least 21 different phone numbers in her pursuit for Mount after he ended their relationship. Sloan also claimed to have fallen pregnant by Gilmour, despite never having an intimate relationship with him. Yeah. Let's cross now to GB News' London reporter Lisa Hartley, who's outside Westminster Magistrates Court for us. Lisa, bit of an odd one, this.
Yeah, you could say that. Ola Sloan left here at Westminster Magistrates Court a short while ago after being handed that suspended prison sentence, and she apparently told the court that she now understands what the footballers went through because she's been doorstepped by the media and she was remorseful. It all started after she was invited to a house party in 2020, November 2020, and as you said, there was a one-night stand with Mount. For about 6 months, the two of them were in communications, and then Mount decided to cut contact, which is when the bombardment of messages was sent. As you said, 21 different phone numbers all went through, changing her phone number all those times, and she would reach out on social media, messaging her Mount and the other two players. Now, Billy Gilmore, who now plays for Brighton, he moved to Brighton from Chelsea, and he said it was at a time when he was feeling isolated because he didn't have any friends or family around him, which is when the bombardment started, and he said it had a huge impact on his life. He couldn't sleep through the worry of this, had to take sleeping tablets. This affected his training, and the club also had to put in place security because he was so worried that she would turn up at work. So so it's just been a really kind of a bizarre story, really, coming from just the one meeting that she had with just one of the players.
No, indeed. Look, Lisa, thank you very, very much. It's Lisa Hartle, who's outside Westminster Magistrates Court for us on this particular incident. And it got me wondering whether or not, you know, as a superstar celebrity like one of these footballers, whether or not this is the kind of thing that happens to you all the time. But it is quite shocking, really, to think that somebody can change their number 21 times. It's kind of like the absolute pinnacle of bunny boiler cases, isn't it? You have a one-night stand with someone and they're just relentlessly haranguing and hounding you non-stop to the point where it ruins your life, for goodness sake. But there we go. Anyway, there is a desperate race against time to reach the deep-sea vessel that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. 5 people are on that submersible, including, of course, British billionaire Hamish Harding. The US Coast Guard will have that press conference for you at 6 p.m. We will bring that to you live here on GB News. I'm also going to be talking about a lot of other topics as well. Yes, I want to know whether or not you think that the British public were fundamentally let down by our political class yesterday with their non-stop kicking of Boris Johnson and the hounding of an inquiry into an inquiry into an inquiry now when it comes to Partygate. Is it time to all move on? I also want to get to the bottom of what on earth is going on in our schools as it's emerged that children aren't identifying as cats, but they're dogs, horses, and even, in one case, the moon. Do pupils need saving from the teachers? Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and in the next hour we are going to be hearing live from a press conference from the US Coast Guard in this race against time to try and save the people on board this submersible vessel that is missing somewhere near the Titanic. It is going to be either the greatest rescue mission of all time, or sadly the Titanic will claim yet more victims. In other news though, there is a mental health crisis taking place in the UK at the moment, and unfortunately the NHS is overwhelmed, which is where Mind comes in, and this is the reason why I am of course raising a lot of money for the mental health charity Mind. So I've got some new stats for you today on the mental health crisis in Britain and the way that it's affecting people, especially, may I add, young men. But in case you had forgotten, I am going to be dancing on stage with the Dream Boys. That's right, it's 8 days away now. I'm having to get my chest waxed on Saturday. It is at 3 p.m. for anyone who really cares, because you guys have raised more than £64,000 now for that mental health charity Mind. The reason I've grouped those stories together is because if the NHS is overwhelmed, that is where groups like Mind step in and fill that gap to help save lives. That fundraising page is justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. I will be talking a fair bit about the mental health crisis and what you and I can do to save lives very shortly, but I'm also going to be talking about the fact that Meghan Markle is apparently an absolute grifter who, believe it or not, faked some Spotify interviews. That's the allegation against her. Is she allergic to the truth, I wonder? What does all of this really mean going forward for hers and Harry's credibility? So we'll be talking about all of that. And also, as well, the kids are not all right. No. So you've now got kids at school genuinely being told that it's okay to identify as a dog, a cat, a horse, or in one case, the flipping moon. What is going on? Why are teachers not standing up to this? People say, oh, it's nice and it's nurturing. No, it's not. It's cruel to children to make them think that they can go around behaving like a cat. They're either going to get an absolute kicking or end up not being prepared for the real world. It is time that we stood up and we told your kids, you can't be a cat. Patrick Christys on GB News. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Yes, I will have up to the second updates in this hunt for that submersible that has got 5 people on board somewhere near the wreck of the Titanic. Make sure you keep your eyes and ears peeled, because if that press conference starts early, we will have it for you live here on this very show. I want your views on everything though, gbviews at gbnews.com, including whether or not you think it's cruel to be kind, basically. We should just be telling kids, you cannot be an animal, stop it, it's nonsense. gbviews at gbnews.com. Now, headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Well, the top stories this hour. The very latest news on the rescue teams and expanding their search for a submersible tourist vessel now. It was en route to the shipwreck off the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean. 5 people are inside the submersible, which is believed to have approximately 2 days of oxygen left. The family of British billionaire and explorer Hamish Harding, who's on board, have this afternoon released a statement saying they have great faith and trust in the rescue teams. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel around 1 hour and 45 minutes into its 2-hour descent to the Titanic site at the bottom of the Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. That was on Sunday morning, and we understand now a Canadian aircraft has joined in the rescue effort. Here, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has said he hopes the passengers will be found soon.
I want to put on record the UK government's thoughts to those individuals who are currently in the submersible in the North Atlantic. We wish them all the luck, and of course we hope that they will be swiftly found and returned to their loved ones.
Foreign Secretary speaking earlier. Well, as Patrick's been saying, the US Coast Guard due to hold a news conference on the latest regarding that search at 6 o'clock our time. We'll be covering that live for you here on GB News. In the meantime, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out on her first return to the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. That's after she was arrested and released without charge following a police investigation into the SNP's finances. Ms Sturgeon was asked whether she should stand down from the party.
I will always consider what is in the best interests of the SNP. As I've said before, and I repeat, I don't see it as any kind of suggestion it's been a sacrifice. The SNP has been my life, and that's been voluntary and something that I cherish and continue to cherish. But I'm also an individual that is entitled to assert what I believe to my very, very core that I have done nothing wrong. I respect the process that is underway, but I will continue to maintain that very clearly.
Social media personality Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have been charged with rape, human trafficking and forming a criminal gang to exploit women. The Tate brothers were first arrested at their Bucharest home in December and have been under house arrest ever since. The trial will be held in Romania. They've previously denied the charges, and a spokesperson for the brothers say they welcome a trial to demonstrate their innocence. Now, a trial date has been set for January the 12th for the man accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill 3 others in Nottingham last week. Valdo Calocane will enter his pleas in September. He appeared at Nottingham Crown Court today, charged with murdering 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates on June the 13th. The 31-year-old is also charged with attempting to murder 3 pedestrians by driving Mr Coates' van at them in the city centre. To the United States now, where President Joe Biden's son Hunter Biden has pleaded guilty to federal tax charges. A court document shows the 53-year-old entered the plea on 2 charges of willfully failing to pay income tax, and there was a pre-trial diversion agreement on 1 firearm offence as well. The White House is saying the president is supporting his son and his efforts to rebuild his life. And a trial date has been set for Donald Trump in the former United States president's documents case. The judge has set an initial date for August the 14th. He faces 37 criminal charges of mishandling files. He's accused of keeping US national security data. Trump has pleaded not guilty to the charges that he unlawfully mishandled the sensitive files at a court in Miami just a few days ago. He's the first current or former president to face criminal charges, all of which he denies. And lastly, King Charles has arrived at Royal Ascot today, the first time attending as monarch alongside Queen Camilla. Arriving by traditional horse and carriage, the couple, joined by the Duke and Duchess of Wellington, waved to the crowds in the grandstands. His Majesty has taken over ownership of the late Queen Elizabeth's thoroughbred racehorses, with several due to compete over the coming days. You with GB News, more news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
Well, we start with the latest on this desperate search for the submersible that's gone missing near the site of the Titanic. A reminder for you that the US Coast Guard is scheduled to have a news conference at 6 o'clock our time, so in about 50 minutes' time. We will bring that to you live right here on GB News. Sometimes these things can start a bit early, so it's well worth keeping your eyes and ears peeled as well, because we will be bringing that to you. So as soon as we're good to go, we'll go for it here. It comes after the French government said that it will send a ship with a deep-sea diving vessel to help with the search. A pipe-laying vessel has arrived at the scene of where the sub went missing on an expedition to the wreckage of the Titanic. With less than 50 hours oxygen remaining, and that, I think, is a best-case scenario, really, for the 5 people on board, the US Coast Guard is expanding its search into deeper waters and to a wider area. The sub, named Titan, lost communication with tour operators about 435 miles south of St John's, Newfoundland, on Sunday morning. Earlier in the show, I spoke to a man who was in our Navy's submarine corps for 35 years. He was pretty clear. He said if you lose communication like that, in his view, it means something has gone catastrophically wrong. Doesn't bode well. Among the 5 on board are British billionaire Hamish Harding, UK-based Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. I'm joined in the studio right now by our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, thank you very, very much. Any developments? What's the latest? Where are we?
The latest at the moment, we're expecting this press conference, at 6 o'clock, so there will be an update from the US Coast Guard, then the search and rescue operation continuing. They've widened the search area. They've covered 10,000 square miles now, and they're now searching deeper into the water using this commercial pipe-laying ship that literally lays pipes on the bottom of the ocean that's arrived. It's called the Deep Energy. It's got 2 remotely operated vehicles that can dive to 3,000 metres, which is good. That's 1.8 miles down. Bearing in mind the Titanic rests at about 2.3 miles. Yeah. It's not enough, but it will help at least and give them a little bit more visually under the water. I mean, if they were to spot it further down than that, then they would still... And this will be the next stage. If indeed they can locate where it is and they can establish whether it is functioning, is there heat inside, are the heat systems held up, is the pressure held up, are they alive in there? And then how are we going to help it resurface? Are we going to pull it up, or do we mechanically send something down? And there's not many vessels that can reach that depth to untether it from wherever it may become entangled to get it back to the surface. But as you say, time is running out, oxygen is running out. And yeah, there's an international effort underway. There's a French vessel on the way as well that's got a deep sea vessel as well. I don't know whether it can reach those depths. Very few can. But this is a tricky situation, and it's uncharted territory, really, for people that carry out these kind of search and rescue operations. Because in the past, and you touched on it when you were talking to the former submariner, normally when these sorts of things happen, it's submarines, right? Bigger vessels, better equipped to last for longer at great depths. This is a tiny
tank, basically, it's like a transit van with 5 people crammed inside of it, essentially, isn't it, really? And, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, hearts go out to the families and to those on board, and fingers crossed we get the result that would, I think, comfortably be considered the greatest rescue operation of all time. But, again, we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the very bottom of the oceans. And this is... like you've said, you know, going to be nigh on impossible, really.
Yeah, and especially since when these sorts of things normally happen, when something sinks to the bottom, when a ship is lost at sea, it emits a beacon, and then the search and rescue operation swings into action. The Coast Guard, the military, they can follow that beacon. There is no beacon here. No. They are metaphorically and literally searching in freezing, cold, dark, deep water at great pressure, and it's really a case of just sheer numbers and a bit of luck, a lot of luck probably, trying to come across it. Because as we mentioned, they're using a lot of sonar. That's difficult when the bottom of the ocean is covered in wreckage from the Titanic. It's got an irregular surface. Difficult to see see using the sonar the shape of the Titan sitting in that. It would be much easier if it was just a flat bottom. Yeah. Although one would argue that it wouldn't even be in that place at that site in the first place. But yeah, it's difficult.
Paul, thank you very, very much. And there is that news conference, which we will take live here at 6 o'clock. Paul Hawkins, our national reporter. Now, I can speak now to Mike Wellham, who is a marine operations specialist. Mike, thank you very much. I am really fascinated to have your insight and your take on this. Is there any hope?
Always difficult to answer that one. There's always hope until you've got the evidence that there is none. This one is particularly difficult. It's the depth of water. It's the type of vessel. It's as your previous commentator was saying, it's very small. It doesn't have a lot of equipment on board it. The critical factors here, the water is the big one. They're going to be sitting inside that small unit, and they'll be breathing the atmosphere that's in there. So there's CO2 going to come off from the breathing, and they're going to have to top up with oxygen. I haven't seen any information yet exactly how much oxygen is carried on board, but that will go down. There's 5 of them in there. If any of them are panicking, that will take it up even worse. They've lost communication, so the beacon has not been transmitting to the surface. We don't know why that has happened. They can't actually come out of that submarine. It's down there. They have to bring the whole unit up to be able to get them out. It should be able to drop its ballast and float to the surface. That hasn't happened that we know of at the moment. And hence,
what does this indicate, Mike? This is the thing, because yesterday, Mike, when news first broke of this, all of the noise was, look, it's going to be all right because it can drop its ballast, it can float back to the surface. That's what it's supposed to do. But what we know so far is that we've got massive amounts of search and rescue operations on the surface. They haven't located it, which indicates that it's probably not there. It therefore means that it lost communication, it potentially plunged straight to the bottom and can't get back up. What does all of this imply to you, then? Something has gone catastrophically wrong here?
Well, I would suggest on that there's a catastrophic failure, an implosion, maybe the port, which is obviously a weak part of the system, has blown in. And if that has happened, then that's it. It's all over.
Why is that weak? Sorry, Mike. Look, you're going to have to talk me through the basics of this because I don't know anything about the structure of it in that sense.
You've got a submarine which is a steel or a fabric construction, and it's usually one part, and there will be welded parts to it. The welded parts, although strong, they could become the weak part. But the port is quite a large area where it sits in there. And, you know, that's when you've got so much pressure going on to the unit itself, that can, if there's any weakness in the design, excuse me, in the design of it, then that's where it can implode.
OK. And clearly we hope that at 6 p.m, when we take this press conference live right here on GB News, that we do get some good news. It's not looking great at the moment. Our thoughts go to those involved and to the families involved, of course. Mike, when you're in that craft and there's something along the lines of around 50 hours worth of oxygen left in their best case scenario, if it's still intact, what will they be doing to try and preserve that? I mean, is it almost better to try to go to sleep to regulate your breathing, or what will be happening?
Well, you certainly won't be jumping around and doing anything. You try to chill out as much as you can. It depends on the battery life as well as to the heating, because I've been in a diving bell when we had a failure on the systems, which is a very similar in the sphere side. And it's the cold. The cold at that depth is incredible, and you know it will make the inside of the unit very, very cold. So you're combating that. You won't have a lot of lighting because you'd want to save your batteries, and you'll be breathing as shallow and as quietly as possible, all in trying to save the systems you've got there that might be keeping you alive. That's if it hasn't imploded.
if it hasn't imploded it indeed. Mike, a slightly broader question here now. Should these kind of craft exist? It's $250,000 a pop to get on board this and go and have a look at the Titanic. Some people might think that the Titanic, whilst it might have been meant to have been found, maybe should have been left alone a bit. I don't know. What do you think?
For me, leave it alone. You know, it's a graveyard in effect. But people go down, and people want to go down, and people have got the money. It's like they're going up into space. These craft have got to be designed, built, and operated as they would do on a proper research, the same as the Navy and the Woods Hole Institute. People like that, professional organisations operate. This is quite a small craft that's gone down, and you know, what's the life support on it? But it must have passed some test to be allowed to operate. So that will have to be looked at in due course to see what, you know, on the safety side of it. But it's high risk. It is really high risk to go down in a small craft to that depth.
OK, just one more with you, Mike, while I've got you, if that's OK. Let's just say, because I know that they're trying to put various things in the water at the moment, trying to get some ping off it, trying to locate this thing. Let's say they find it, let's say that it's intact, and let's say that everyone's alive on board, and they know where it is. How the heck do you get it back up?
Well, they're going to have to put something very heavy down there. They're going to have to lift it. You can't put men in the water down there. They're going to have to try and lift that to the surface.
Okay.
How they go about that, it's going to be a lot of planning. And you're looking at vessels and vehicles that they really don't exist in great quantities. There's very, very few of them, a handful in the world. And you've got to get them there, and they've got to get down to that depth and be able to work when they get there.
Look, Mike, thank you. I've got no doubt I'll be talking to you again at some point in the very near future as this situation progresses. As Mike Wellham there, who is a marine operations specialist. Easy for me to say that. Thank you very much. All right, OK, so loads more on this story on our website. Get that at gbnews.com, fastest growing national news site in the country. I want to remind you as well, at 6 p.m, we will be taking this press conference live. It might start a bit earlier than that, in which case, of course, that will be during this show. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that news conference. The US Coast Guard holding a press conference with some more information and that desperate search for that submersible. But there we go. Now, the government has been urged to launch a public inquiry into systematic failings in mental health hospitals. This ties in very closely with something that regular viewers and listeners to this show will know that I care deeply about. It's the mental health crisis in Britain, but it's also what can be done about it. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. I'll have much more info on this very, very shortly. Britain's News Channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
The Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, a little later this hour, I will get more on the allegations that Meghan Markle faked some of the interviews on her short-lived Spotify show. Surely not. I mean, even for somebody who's been labelled a grifter, this would be taking the absolute biscuit, wouldn't it? But a reminder that at 6 o'clock, we will bring you the news conference held by the US Coast Guard on the search for the deep-sea vessel that's gone missing near the side of the Titanic. Now, what you are having a look at here on your screens is St John's Harbour. So this, as I understand it, is the closest point of land at the moment in Newfoundland in Canada, from which a lot of search and rescue operations have been launched and are currently taking place. There will be a news conference taking place from there, from around there anyway, at 6 p.m. So in just around half an hour's time. It may well come earlier, so I want you to obviously stay watching and listening. We'll bring that to you live. That's St John's Harbour in Newfoundland, where the submersible with 5 passengers departed before losing contact with surface crews. So that's the very latest from that. I have gotten for you now, though, a GB News exclusive. So GB News can exclusively reveal that Met police officers spent 4 hours this afternoon twiddling their thumbs, unable to process files because their computer system was unexpectedly switched off. Was switched off. The planned outage, first revealed last night on this channel, ran from 11 till 3 today. GB News investigative reporter Charlie Peters has the very latest. Sorry, Charlie, I butchered that somewhat, but just explain to me what's going on.
This is the Connect system. It's a new IT system that was introduced in November 2022, some 33 months delayed. It's cost them £150 million, and it has not been introduced with success. On the intranet forums for the police in January, there were over 300 complaints about the system internally. It was designed to link up all the various systems that the Met has, but there seems to be an enormous amount of frustration, which has led to this planned outage today, 11 to 4, middle of the workday, when officers could not process files, could not look at case files, nor property records, and even had to start using manual uploads for DNA samples.
Now, this is of vital importance because police often have 24 hours to charge someone, don't they? And so if 4 of those hours, when they should be processing things and sending them to the CPS, were unable to be done because of this planned outage, in theory, that could mean that violent offenders can walk free.
Patrick, you're absolutely right. And last night when I spoke to police officers about this outage, one, obviously on condition of anonymity, told me if I was a criminal, I'd want to be committing crime tomorrow, 11 to 3, because they knew they would have an extra 4 hours of potential grace when the police wouldn't be able to process any files. Another officer I spoke to today told me that they were twiddling their thumbs, that 11 to 3 they were doing absolutely nothing with files because they couldn't. And case files reportedly could not be sent to the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, to deliver vital charges within that very short 24-hour clock. Police officers have the tyranny of the clock against them when they're dealing with these cases.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, in theory, then, yes, people could have walked free, vile offenders, as a result of this planned outage, which is happening because we have spent 150 million quid on a computer system that basically doesn't work.
That is the issue in a nutshell. Now, the Met said that this was a planned outage, that it was happening, you know, because they needed to iron out some kinks in the system. But this system has been delivered in various drops, and they're delaying the third introduction of the system due to there being so many problems. And I think it's also worth noting that this outage between 11 and 3 happens in a really crucial time for policing, because at 2 p.m, there's a handover of shifts. A handover-takeover process takes place, and it's really vital, police officers tell me, that period is free of as many problems as possible, so they can have a smooth handover-takeover process. Not being able to access any case records or files or property records during that time is obviously not ideal.
No, in fact, it's actually actively damaging to any kind of case. Look, Charlie, thank you very, very much. One of bringing us yet another exclusive. Charlie Peters there, of course, with that GB News exclusive, just investigating quite a staggering incident, really, that has taken place in the police at the moment. I just want to very, very quickly go to a couple of the emails. Lots of you getting in touch, a lot of you getting in touch when it comes to the scenes that we saw in the House of Commons yesterday. I've been banging the drum about this. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, we've got a small boats crisis, we've got mortgage rates going through the roof, we've got an NHS crisis, we've not got enough school places, all of this stuff. And our MPs yesterday thought that it was a great use of their time and of taxpayers' money just spend more days drilling down into the Boris Johnson saga. They're now going to have an investigation into the investigation, for goodness sake. Where do this lot get off? Is that really the best use of their time? And we've had loads of you getting in touch, including Darren. Darren's been on, and Darren says, Patrick, this is absolutely shocking. I would just knock the place down and start again. Yeah, exactly. Let down by Parliament, says Barry. I think we've been let down badly by Parliament as a whole, and most especially the Privileges Committee. Totally undemocratic kangaroo court is an underestimation. Yeah, there's a lot of this. A waste of time, money and effort, says John. A whitewash by a biased, crooked and corrupt committee. Those are John's views, of course. John also goes on to say that this is bullying. And at what point is it bullying? At what point should Boris Johnson have maybe stood up and said, hang on a minute, you are affecting me here. This is ridiculous. Have you ever seen a man get the kind of public kicking that Boris Johnson has had? But loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. I will talk about a very worrying story. The increase in school kids who identify, believe it or not, as animals. One is identifying as the moon, and the teachers are just letting them do it. And there's more bad news for Harry and Meghan. When will it end? Hopefully never. And she's accused of faking interviews on her Spotify series. Surely not. They can't be that much of a grifter. Get real, though. Patrick Christys here on GB News. I will be back with you after the headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, the top stories right now. Rescue teams are expanding their search for a submersible tourist vessel that was en route to the shipwreck of the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. 5 people are inside that submersible, which is believed to have approximately 2 days of oxygen left. The family of British billionaire and explorer Hamish Harding, who's on board, released a statement a short time ago saying they have great faith and trust in the rescue teams. The Coast Guard lost contact with the vessel about an hour and 45 minutes into the descent. It is off the coast of the Newfoundland area in Canada. A news conference on the latest regarding how that search is going in just under half an hour's time, live right here at GB News. Now, social media personality Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have been charged with rape, human trafficking and forming a criminal gang to exploit women. They were first arrested at their Bucharest home in December and have been under house arrest ever since. The trial will be held in Romania. They've denied the charges. And in the United States, President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has pleaded guilty to federal tax charges. A court document shows the 53-year-old entered the plea on 2 charges of willfully failing to pay income taxes, and there's also a pre-trial diversion agreement on 1 firearm offence. The White House says the president is supporting his son and his efforts to rebuild his life. And here King Charles has arrived at Royal Ascot, the first time attending as monarch alongside Queen Camilla. Arriving by traditional horse and carriage, the royal couple were joined by the Duke and Duchess of Wellington, and they waved to the crowds. His Majesty has taken over ownership of the late Queen's thoroughbred racehorses, with several due to compete over the coming days. Those are your latest news stories. Head to our website, gbnews.com, for more.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2732 and 1.1676 euros. The price of gold is £1,521 and 46 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed today at 7,569 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
There are now just 8 short days until I strut my stuff on stage with the Dream Boys, who in their own words are the most famous male strippers in the UK. Yes, I will be dancing with the lads on stage Wednesday next week on the 28th of June. I'm going to do 3 routines on the night. One of them will be a solo. I'm doing it all to raise money for the mental health charity Mind. And I'm delighted to say, I'm very, very grateful to say that you have raised almost £65,000, which is incredible. Thank you to everyone who's given money so far. You can donate by going to justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. It is for that mental health charity. It is, of course, for Mind. And every single day, I actually do read the comments that are underneath some of the donations. And I won't go through them all now. I want to make sure that I do them all justice, really. But the amount of people who have got in touch and donated, even if just £5 or even less sometimes, right all the way up to a couple of grand a pop, who say this is for my brother who we sadly lost to suicide, or this is for my husband who sadly passed away a few years ago for taking their own lives, or this is for my dad. And it goes on and on, or a colleague. And there's a lot of these, a huge amount of these. And it is an epidemic. Mental health and, unfortunately, explicitly male suicide. Obviously, mental health in any form is bad. A mental health crisis, any kind of suicide is bad. But the male mental health situation is an epidemic of epic proportions. Apparently, it's the largest killer of men under the age of 40, which I think we can all agree is astonishing, really, when you think about cancer, road traffic accidents, everything else. Now, every single day, the latest figures that I've seen anyway show that 12 men take their own lives. And certainly the comments that are underneath the fundraising that I'm doing there make for very, very moving reading. And I will be compiling a list of those and doing a read-through of some of those shortly. But justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys is that link. For what it's worth, I will be humiliating myself on stage, but it is, of course, for an incredibly good cause. And if we can try to save some lives together, it would mean the world to everybody out there who is suffering. And I think, really, it is very pertinent, given that Mind, the charity, has found that 1/3 of British adults say that they don't think a mental health hospital would treat their loved one with respect or compassion, whilst almost 86% say they're worried, sad or angry about the mental health situation after a string of scandals. I wanted to talk now to Gemma Byrne, who's the policy and campaigns manager for Mind. Gemma, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show, and it's great to discuss this kind of stuff. Just explain a bit about the scale of the mental health crisis in this country and where Mind comes in, because not everyone can, unfortunately, because there's so many of them, get the instant urgent help that they need when they need it most? And you know, let's be honest, there's not always time to hang around when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, hi Patrick, and firstly just want to say massive thank you for your fundraising and to everyone who's been donating money. So as you said, today we've launched a campaign where we're calling on the UK government to raise the standard of mental health hospitals. And that's because over the past 9 months or so, we've been seeing a steady stream of reports about unsafe and often at times abusive care in mental health hospitals. And whilst we've been seeing a lot of these over the last 9 months, it's actually been going on for years and years. And we think it's time to put a stop to that. And we really want to call on the government to raise the standard of mental health hospitals.
OK, so when it comes to Mind at the moment, what happens if somebody is really struggling at the minute and is in desperate need of some care, some attention, some advice? Where does Mind come in? Just explain to our viewers and our listeners why you're so important.
Yeah, so at Mind, we provide information online on our website about what you can do if you're struggling with your mental health or if a loved one is, where you can go to seek support. We also have an information line that people can call to get more information about how, again, they can get support with their mental health. And then we have a whole network of local Mind offices around the country that themselves deliver mental health services to support people.
OK, and it is an epidemic, it absolutely is, and so many people are worried in the first place about admitting or recognising that there is some issue, dealing with the stigma that may, wrongly and unfairly, but may surround that, being able to access care and then being worried about the quality of the care that they are getting. And as we've just said there, 86% of Brits are worried or angry about the mental health situation and concerned about the care that is being offered. So what could be done to make that care better and make it more accessible for people, do you think?
Well, the first thing we're calling for is for the government to launch an inquiry into the failings in mental health hospitals that have been going on for years. But there are things that the government can do in the immediate term. So, for example, we've seen decades of underfunding of mental health services across the board. And we want to see investment from the government in mental health hospitals in terms of the actual buildings, but also the staff that work in those hospitals. And we want to see the government introduce the Mental Health Bill, which will be delivering some really vital reforms to the Mental Health Act, which will strengthen people's rights when they're in hospital.
OK, yeah, I think that's so vitally important. I would also, by the way, I don't know if Mind... I don't want to put words into Mind's mouth here. This is just my own personal view. I know that a lot of police and a lot of paramedics, etc., when they get their emergency call-outs, also often it's to do with people's mental health. And I mean, it would seem like a good solution for me to have some kind of rapid response mental health unit that can both free up some of our other emergency services, but also tackle the issue at hand. So they're people who are trained and capable of dealing with that life and death situation are the ones who attend, as opposed to, with respect, police officers who are maybe more used to going to various other offences and maybe better trained to deal with other things like that, as it were, maybe should go there instead. But look, Mind does incredible work, and thank you very much for everything that you do. I know firsthand that Mind can save lives, and it is a cause that's very, very close to my heart. And I do hope to talk to you again, Gemma, at some point soon. And if there's any more that we can do to work together to raise a bit more money, I would love to be a part of that. So there's Gemma Byrne there, who's the Policy and Campaigns Manager for Mind. So thank you very, very much. Just quickly, just a very quick reminder of that fundraising link. And thank you very much for everyone who's donating. justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. So there we go. Right, now, I am getting in my ear that I have some breaking news to bring to you. Rishi Sunak will face 3 by-elections on Thursday, July the 20th, after Tory MP David Warburton formally quit as an MP. Warburton stood down after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine use. He was the MP for Somerton and Frome, so the by-elections to find replacements for Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams will also be on July the 20th. So that breaking news is that there will now be 3 by-elections on Thursday, July the 20th, after Tory MP David Warburton has formally quit as an MP. He stood down after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine use, and that by-election will take place in Somerton and Frome. So, yes, okay, so we're going to have elections for him, Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams, all on July the 20th. Right, OK, so it's going to be a busy day for Rishi, a day of reckoning for Rishi Sunak as well. We'll be fascinated to see how they all go, bearing in mind that the latest one-to-one opinion polling between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson has Boris Johnson in the lead. Shock horror. Who would have thought it after everything, hey? But in other news, yesterday I told you a school teacher at East Sussex had called a 13-year-old girl despicable because she wouldn't accept that a classmate identified as a cat. Well, Number 10 have piped up this afternoon saying that a head teacher should not allow kids to identify as cats. Yes, that's right. That's come from Downing Street. But it's now emerged that kids across the UK are claiming to be horses, dinosaurs and even the moon. It's causing problems in class and it makes you worry about the kids who insist on being addressed as if they are animals. With me now is political commentator and UK director of the Common Sense Society, Emma Webb. Emma, thank you very, very much. Why on earth do teachers indulge children who want to identify as horses? What's going on?
Where do you even begin? And Patrick, you said earlier about the way that the government is and that Parliament is wasting its time on things that don't really matter. Well, what a clown world we're living in if Number 10 has to release a statement telling head teachers that they shouldn't indulge children's fantasy thinking. Look, I think across the board, across the country, from time immemorial, for as long as there have been schools, there have been children identifying as all sorts of things. I was saying to your producer earlier that when I was a child, I used to like pretending to be a horse, and my dad made me some hooves made out of coconut so I could clip-clop around the street, but nobody suggested at any point grafting real hooves to my feet. So this is something that children do. This is magical thinking. But we're not talking about very young children here. We're not talking about 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. We're talking about children who are in year 9, in year 11, who are coming in and insisting that they identify as an animal or an inanimate object, and the teachers are indulging them. And the reason why I think they're doing that is because they're so frightened around anything to do with identity that they think that the automatic policy has to be affirmation. And then, of course, you have teachers like this teacher who was in the news the other day, who's clearly, an ideologue, imposing particularly contested ideas on children. And ultimately, this is to do with child-centred learning. We shouldn't be indulging the magical thinking of children. Children identify as all sorts of things. And I think actually what this does is, because it's an ad absurdum argument, because it's taken the logic of transgenderism to its ultimate extreme and shown how silly it is to have this policy of affirmation with children. I think it shows how silly it is to take children seriously when they tell you that they identify as this, that or the other. Teachers should be the authority in the classroom.
Yeah, and a load of people are going, give 16-year-olds the vote. All right, well, that one thinks he's a horse. So I'd rather not have that. I mean, who do they vote for? Animal Rising, probably. I don't know. But I do find it staggering that we're in a situation now where teachers, fully grown adults, will be looking at children in the eye and going, well, I have to accept the fact that you are now the moon. What happens if one of them identifies as a head teacher and sacks them? Do they just pack their locker up and go home? It's absolute lunacy that's going on at the moment. But you know what? Yet again, I will say it, parents have got to have something to do with this as well. And it is the right thing to do to look your child in the eye and say, you are not a cat.
Completely. I like the suggestion as well that Michael Deacon made in The Telegraph earlier, saying that you could imagine a situation where there would be a mandate for kitty litter trays in all public bathrooms if we continue down the path that we're going on. So the situation is completely absurd. The adults need to be the adults in the room, and unfortunately they're not. The teachers need to be the authorities in the classroom. We can't have this mad situation where we're taking up serious time. It's a point that Douglas Murray has made. We don't have time for this nonsense. This is complete nonsense. And there have been some people who have suggested this is to do with COVID. This is, a mental health problem. If a child turns up at school saying they're a horse when they're in year 11, then the teacher should be looking into safeguarding concerns around that child, because something isn't right there if you really do believe it. I think the problem is that the children now believe that they have the power to force the adults in the room and to force their fellow students to say anything so long as they make it about identity.
Absolutely. I want schools to tell children to identify or aspire to identify as real doctors, as historians, as brain surgeons, as all of these wonderful things that go on to actually, punch a hole through the fabric of society in a good way. Not to go, oh, yeah, you know what, yeah, you can be the moon, actually. You can be the moon. Yeah, it's just absolute lunacy. Look, thank you very, very much, Emma. Always great to have you on the show. Emma Webb there, who is the political commentator and UK director of the Common Sense Society and occasional presenter here on GB News as well. Fan favourite. Now, a reminder that the US Coast Guard will hold a news conference at 6 p.m. on that search for the submersible that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. We will have that live. That's around 10 minutes away. If it comes early, we will take it early and we will go straight to it right here on this show, that live press conference. I'm also going to be talking very shortly about Meghan. She's been accused, get this, of faking some of the interviews on her Spotify series, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse for Meghan Markle. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you are looking at there is the setup for this press conference that's about to be held any moment now by the US Coast Guard. In fact, no, we'll just keep on these images for a second. There's going to be a press conference held by the US Coast Guard in the next few minutes, and it's going to have the latest on the search for this submersible that's gone missing near the wreck of the Titanic. We will bring you that press conference live right here on GB News. Could be starting any second. And as we know, 5 people are missing on a submersible somewhere near the Titanic. We'll bring the latest for you as and when we get it from that press conference. So, like I said, we all are holding our breath to make sure that it is the greatest ever rescue mission. How likely that is remains to be seen, but there will be an update for you live on this channel at 6 p.m, so make sure you keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. We will go to it earlier if necessary. But the hits keep on coming for Harry and Meghan. Yes, Meghan's been accused of faking some of the interviews that she did in her podcast for Spotify. Surely not. I mean, this woman's always been an upstanding moral compass, hasn't she? But the couple's deal was worth around £18 million. It was terminated after just one series, and now the American website Pod News has heard from multiple sources that she's essentially been getting other people to do her interviews, and she's been dubbing her voice over the top of it afterwards. On top of that, a senior Spotify executive called Harry and Meghan grifters. I'm joined now by royal biographer Angela Levin, who is going to get stuck right in. Angela, do you think realistically that not even the podcasts were true?
Yes, well, I think we're getting used to that, the exaggerations and all that sort of thing. The problem about Meghan is that she isn't an interviewer. I mean, lots of people know what it is, and that is basically talking to people, being quiet about yourself, but listening to them. But Meghan, in that year ago chat machine, she just talks about herself. So when she has really interesting people like Serena Williams and Maria Carey, she has to be smarter than them and talk about me. Oh, you had that. Well, I had this. You know, Serena Williams was telling her about playing playing tennis in a final when her little daughter broke her arm. And Meghan says, oh, well, when I was in South Africa, there was terrible fire in my baby's room. It turns out there was a bit of puff of smoke there, and they unplugged it. But the baby, little Archie, was with his nanny. So, you know, she does make a huge thing out of everything. And I think they were desperately boring as a result.
But the problem is that credibility has always been a massive issue for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, to be fair. We've had time and time again of a statement being made and then either it being completely proven to be a demonstrable lie or it being a whopping great big exaggeration. And when people tuned in to a podcast, they were expecting that to be an interview that was conducted by Meghan Markle. Otherwise, she is literally a voiceover artist on millions of pounds a year. Surely the Spotify executive was right to call her an absolute grifter.
Well, it's not true, and it's an exaggeration, and it's actually grabbing all the money you can without actually giving much back. And I think that that's the sort of thing that, unfortunately, the couple have been doing. They don't think they're obliged to do that. You know, they're royal, they're very important, they're globally known. And so it doesn't matter if they don't do the sort of hard work. I mean, actually, I think talking to people is a very interesting thing to do. But, you know, it takes time. You've got to research it. You've got to learn things. They don't want to. And so they leave it to other people to do, not the dirty work, but to do the work that's sort of boring to them. So they can take all the praise. But this one, it wasn't praise. It was desperately boring. And, of course, when Maria Carey called her a diva, she went absolutely berserk. She spent ages explaining why she wasn't. And then Maria apologised, and she said it was all about her clothing. You know, she couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand listening to Maria and actually not getting involved in that sort of all about me argument.
It's a staggeringly easy job, I'm sorry, but to be paid $18 million or pounds or however much it is to essentially have a conversation with somebody briefly is shocking.
Yeah, but that's the fault of Spotify. They should have been very careful. They should have organised something where they had a small fee just to see how it went, to see how the audience liked it, and then move on from there. But they obviously had their arm twisted behind their back to come up with a ridiculous amount. And the promise, here's what you said just now, the promise that they would do things, you know, a great deal of things in the next 2 or 3 years. The fact that they've just won shows you how you can't really believe what they say.
No, and based on this and the evidence that we've seen so far, if indeed it is true that they're about to sign some kind of deal with Dior, which would explain maybe why Prince Harry wore Dior to his father's coronation, you would expect that they're going to end up with a team of people doing all of the work, and Meghan turns up on the day wearing Armani. But there we go. Angela, thank you very, very much. It's a bit short and sweet, Angela, I'm afraid, but we're going to have to go to a little bit of breaking news involving a submersible off the coast of Canada. So, Angela Levin there, royal biographer, reacting, of course, to the old Meghan Markle's latest scandal that apparently she might have just been grifting when it comes to Spotify as well. Dewbs and Co joins me, Michelle specifically, and we are going to be going, I believe, look, in a couple of minutes anyway, to a press conference in
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is... Yeah.
US Coast Guard, basically, any second now, due to update us on the status of that case that you've been talking about. It's gripped the nation, actually, hasn't it? You've got 5 people in what I would term, it's like a capsule, barefooted, sitting. There's no chairs, no real room to manoeuvre. There's just one tiny window. Their oxygen will be depleting as we speak. No idea, Patrick, where these people are. Are they on the surface? Not looking likely at the moment, because there's a huge search operation in air that has not yet found them. Where are they?
We'll get more info at 6, but I had a couple of experts on over the course of this show, and one of them said he'd spent decades as a submariner. This implies that something catastrophic has happened. The other person said that the port side of this particular vessel, with it being welded together, would have had a weakness. It's dealing with extreme pressures, especially at those depths, and therefore, unfortunately, unless we hear something different, of course, which we all hope we do at 6 o'clock, unfortunately, it is a pretty bleak picture.
Well, I don't know. I've got all my fingers, all my toes, all my bits crossed that it's going to be positive. I hope that it is. I hope that's what we can bring to you at 6 o'clock. I found this quite interesting. This is the waiver that one of the people on one of the previous trips, one of these previous trips, he had to sign. Among it, it said, described the submersible as an experimental vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma or death.
Yeah.
That's what one of the previous travellers...
I just wonder if we can bring up at all the cameras that we've got or the shot that we've got of where this press conference is going to be taking place. And we can go to it now, yes. We can go to it now.
For the efforts, the rescue efforts. I do ask after his brief statement, we'll be opening up to some questions for you all. We do have about 10 minutes today, so after his following his statement, we do ask to limit everybody to one question, and we'll try to get around as many as we can. Me and my staff will be available afterwards so that we can take some additional questions that may not have been able to get to or may not answered fully to get your contact information, and our staff will be able to get back to you with that information. This time I'd like to welcome Captain Jamie Frederick, Response Coordinator in the 1st Coast Guard District.
Good afternoon. I'm Captain Jamie Frederick with the 1st Coast Guard District Response Department, which oversees search and rescue operations under Rear Admiral John Mauger, the 1st Coast Guard District Commander. I'll provide a brief recap of our coordinated search efforts for the 21-foot submersible with 5 people on board, along with providing an update on current search efforts and plans for the next 24 hours. On behalf of all the men and women of the United States Coast Guard and our search partners, we offer our most heartfelt thoughts and prayers for the 5 crew members, their families, and their loved ones. Our crews are working around the clock to ensure that we are doing everything possible to locate the Titan and the 5 crew members. Yesterday, we stood up a unified command consisting of expertise from the United States Coast Guard, the United States Navy, Canadian Armed Forces and Coast Guard, and the Titan's parent company, Ocean Gate Expedition. This is a complex search effort which requires multiple agencies with subject matter expertise and specialized equipment. While the U.S. Coast Guard has assumed the role of Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator, we do not have all of the necessary expertise and equipment required in a search of this nature. The Unified Command brings that expertise and additional capability together to maximize effort in solving this very complex problem. And we're out of order here. As a recap, on Sunday, the Coordination Command Center in Boston received a report from the Canadian expedition vessel Polar Prince of an overdue 21-foot submarine Titan with 5 people on board. The Titan was attempting to dive on the wreck of the Titanic approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod and 400 miles south of St. John's, Newfoundland. Approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into the scheduled dive, the Polar Prince lost all communication with the Titan. The Polar Prince conducted an initial search and then requested Coast Guard assistance. The U.S. Coast Guard in Boston assumed the responsibility of Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator and immediately launched search assets. Since Sunday, the Coast Guard has coordinated search efforts with the U.S. and Canadian Coast Guard, Air National Guard aircraft, and the Polar Prince, which have searched a combined 7,600 square miles, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. These search efforts have focused on both surface, with C-130 aircraft searching by sight and with radar, and subsurface, with P-3 aircraft were able to drop and monitor sonar buoys. To date, those search efforts have not yielded any results. Search efforts have continued through last night and today. Today, the vessel Deep Energy, a 194-meter pipe-laying vessel, arrived on scene with underwater ROV capability. They have rendezvoused with the vessel Polar Prince and commenced an ROV dive at the last known of the position of the Titan and the approximate position of the Titanic wreck. That operation is currently ongoing. Additionally, a Canadian P-3 aircraft is currently conducting a 6-hour search of the area, and